Chapter 608. The situation in Lao province began to change. The criticism of Governor Luan Shaoqin was getting louder by the day. Yang Qindong, who recommended Luan Shaoqin, did not say anything at this time, which made many officials puzzled. They even went to the palace in groups of 3 to 5 to meet the 6th young master and express their opinions. But no one was approved. In fact, Yang Qindong was no longer in Wanxiang City, let alone Lao province. How could he meet his subordinates? No one knew that the 6th young master had appeared in front of Shangding City, which was beside the Mekong River. Since things started here, let's start our attack from here. Yang Qindong sighed and looked at Shangding City, which was 5 miles away. He raised his arm gently and then put it down. Beside him, countless Ling Feng and auxiliary soldiers rushed toward Shangding City. Everything happened without warning. At noon, many soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty were still basking in the sun on the tower. Suddenly, they saw the army green approaching from afar. Their brains short-circuited at the first moment, and then came up with an impossible idea. Enemy attack. No one knew who shouted first. Then, chaos broke out on the city gate tower. The soldiers began to look for bows and arrows and other long-range weapons. Shangding City, which had been peaceful for many years, was suddenly facing a ferocious beast. It was completely unprepared. Before the Ling Feng arrived, it was already in chaos. Close the city gate and send someone to Jujing City to ask for help. The centurion guarding the city shouted loudly. When he realized that no one listened to him, he simply went downstairs, found a fast horse, and rushed out of the city gate on the other side. The centurion's idea was simple. 300 miles behind him, there was a 100,000 army led by General Hun Sen in Jujing City. As long as he sent the message there, it would be a great achievement. It was still the same old saying. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Just as the centurion rode out of the city and felt the wind whistling past his ears, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest and fell to the ground with a plop. Due to the inertia, the centurion was sent flying. When he landed on the ground, he was no longer breathing. It turned out that he had been shot in the chest. Since he had suddenly appeared and prepared for such a long time, how could Yang Qindong let the news leak out? When he gave the order to attack, all 4 gates of Shangding City were filled with mercenaries. Before the battle even started, Shangding City was already a dead city. The North City Gate was the main attack, while the other 3 city gates were the main defense. Anyone who rushed out, whether they were dignitaries, soldiers, or ordinary people, was greeted with whistling bullets. With a long spear in hand, who in the world could be his match? With strong fighting spirit and confidence, the mercenaries rushed into Shangding City from the North City Gate without encountering any decent resistance. Then there was a burst of intensive gunfire, and the massacre began. All the people of the Golden Rim dynasty who were still running around on the streets, no matter what their identities were suffering the wrath of the mercenaries. Gunshots came one after another. After only half an hour, the pungent smell of blood floated in the air and did not dissipate for a long time. The street was already full of corpses and rivers of blood, but the mercenaries still had no intention of stopping. Unless they stayed in their homes and did not go out, as long as they went out on the street, they would face a merciless massacre. The mercenaries had never done such a thing before, but this time they took advantage of the massacre of the Sorangan family on the Mekong River to launch a bloody revenge. The mercenaries wanted to use facts to tell the world and warn everyone how terrible it was to be their enemy, and how wrong it was to do so. The massacre lasted for 4 hours, and there was no one left on the street. They stopped and took a breath. The next work was done by the 20,000 Laotian mercenaries. They began to push the doors open one by one. They did not kill anyone, but just called out the surviving people and let them see the bloody scene while cleaning the battlefield. Almost all the Sorangs who were rushed out of their homes were pale, and then vomited. This scene would be imprinted in their minds, and they would never forget it. Clean up the battlefield, gather the valuable things, and arrange a team of 1,000 to drive the carriages back to Laos. Then drive all the people out of Shangding City. Rest for the night, and set off for Jianghu City tomorrow morning. Yang Qindong gave several orders in succession. He did not kill all the Phnom Penh people, but deliberately let a group of people go. He believed that these people would become the best mouthpieces. He believed that it would not take long for this bloody scene to spread throughout the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to completely intimidate his opponents before the war began. He wanted to make their morale plummet, and at the same time, make them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. In this way, when the two armies met, it would be easier for them to win the war. Jianghu City. It was one of the big cities at the north gate of the Sorangan dynasty. It was another big gate after Shangding City. At this moment, the city was full of soldiers. Not only in the city, but also outside the city, there were barracks. One after another, there seemed to be no end to it. Hun Sen's 100,000 troops were stationed here. According to the plan, Hun Sen was the vanguard to rush to Shangding City as soon as possible, then go up north along the Mekong River and directly attack Bansa City in Laos. However, the sudden news from Laos made Hun Sen hesitate. He did not forget King Boromir's advice before he came. This was the time to show his strength. It would be best if they did not have to fight the mercenaries. After all, when facing the powerful mercenaries, they had no advantage except for the number of troops. Now that an accident had occurred, Laos acted as if nothing had happened. Under such circumstances, if Hun Sen still took the initiative to attack the enemy's territory, it would not be defending the country, but provoking the enemy. This was tantamount to forcing the mercenaries to fight with them. This was definitely not what the king wanted to see, so Hun Sen stationed his army in Jianghu City without asking for permission and biding his time. He only sent someone back to Golden Rim City to ask for the king's orders. Hun Sen originally thought that as the vanguard, he would have to fight the mercenaries to the death, even at the cost of his own life. Unexpectedly, the mercenaries were scared, which made the 100,000 troops happy. During the time they were stationed, all the soldiers drank and ate meat every day. Anyway, the military budget was more than enough this time. Most of it was provided by the nobles, so it would be a waste not to eat and drink. They celebrated as if they had won the battle. Even Hun Sen did not say anything when he heard about it. He had been under a lot of pressure before, and now that the pressure was gone, it was time for the soldiers to relax. Because of this, Hun Sen gained the support of most of the soldiers, which made his popularity soar in a short time. He was almost on par with the first general, Dagon. Hun Sen was still immersed in his vanity, but he did not know that danger was approaching. The 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front had arrived outside Jianghu City and were ready to launch a fierce attack. After marching for 2 days, they had covered 300 miles under their feet. Then they rested for an afternoon. When it was dark, the regiments, battalions, and companies began to slowly encircle the 100,000 vanguard troops of the Golden Rim dynasty according to their previous orders. The sky was dark, but the camp of the Golden Rim dynasty was as bright as day. Numerous bonfires were set up, and mutton was hanging on each wooden rack. Under the roasting fire, there was a crackling sound, and the aroma spread far and wide. As the vanguard general, Hun Sen sat on a temporary wooden mat, with good wine in front of him and beautiful women beside him. He drank one cup after another and laughed heartily. It was true that one should enjoy life to the fullest, and not let the golden cup be empty to the moon. Beside Hun Sen, there were some captains and kiliarchs. They used wooden mats to form a large circle. In the circle, 2 skilled soldiers were sparring with each other. Occasionally, there would be 1 or 2 weak soldiers in a strong army who were afraid of death. Similarly, in a weak brigade, there were also warriors with good skills. The 2 soldiers who were competing were the best in the Phnom Penh army. They each displayed what they had learned, and the wonderful performance of their fists on flesh attracted a burst of applause from other soldiers. "Huh, good. You're worthy of being the best in our vanguard. Come, reward them." Hun Sen was affected by the fierce fight between the 2 soldiers and shouted loudly. Then the soldiers beside him took the silver and gave it to the 2 warriors who were performing. The 2 warriors who got the silver quickly retreated and were replaced by others. Even if there were benefits, everyone should share them. The exciting fight here attracted even more soldiers to watch and cheer spontaneously. The aroma of the meat and the lively performance in front of the tent not only attracted the attention of most soldiers, but also many soldiers who were in charge of guarding the perimeter sneaked over. They did not think that this was a violation of military discipline, because they had heard that Laos was scared. They seemed to be afraid of the army of the Golden Rim dynasty, and they were deep in the country. How could the enemy appear here? Almost every soldier had the same idea. The army camp was chaotic, and military discipline was useless. This was the army camp of 100,000 soldiers. The night wind was still blowing. A danger that could decide their life and death was slowly approaching. However, not a single one of the 100,000 people was alarmed. They were still drinking, eating, chatting, and talking about things that interested them. Chapter 609. Young Master, these enemies are too weak. Our vanguard is 500 meters away from them, but they still haven't discovered us. Tiger's Mane put down the night vision telescope in his hand, shook his head, and seemed to be singing a lament for the enemy. Humph. An army without a sense of crisis will never be strong. Come on, send out the signal for the general attack. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. The enemy's carelessness determined their next result. This was the so-called, you reap what you sow. Beta Persei, who had been waiting for a long time, turned around and shouted, let's start the general attack. Yang Er, who had a loud voice to begin with, let out a roar that sounded like the angry roar of the heavens. In an instant, his voice traveled several hundred meters. The second guard team was part-time artillery. After hearing the order, they immediately put the prepared shells into the barrel. Then, the 100mm mortar roared. After flashes of blazing fire flashed in the sky, it fell on the unprepared vanguard camp of the Golden Bien dynasty. Boom! Boom! There was no need to aim at any coordinates at all. Any cannonball that fell down would produce an earth-shaking sound. After every cannonball fell, there would be heart-wrenching screams and screams. Hong Sen, who was still tasting wine and looking at the beauty in his arms from time to time, suddenly felt the ground trembling, as if an earth dragon was about to turn over. Before he could figure out what was going on, huge flames appeared in his sight. He instantly lost his hearing and his mind stopped working at this moment. The only thing left was the scene of him opening his mouth and not making a sound. Kill! The mercenaries, who had already been in place, began to madly rush in from 4 directions. As they continued to move forward, bullets with fire were shot out from the barrel like a dense rain. With the help of the still-burning bonfire, one could see the Golden Bien dynasty soldiers falling to the ground one after another. This was a massacre, without any suspense. From the very beginning of the war, the situation had been one-sided. Yang Chendong had carefully prepared for the war in Laos for nearly 4 months. With the overwhelming advantage of advanced firearms, the enemy's will to fight had crumbled in less than 15 minutes. The entire camp was filled with soldiers begging to surrender. War was such a miraculous thing. One could win against many with a few, defeat the strong with a weak force, and extinguish the flames of war that should have burned for a long time in an instant. In today's battle, at least 2 of the 3 aspects mentioned above were perfectly reflected. In a situation where their military strength was far inferior to the enemy's, due to their meticulous preparations and unparalleled pressure, the enemy was defeated without even putting up a decent resistance. One by one, they knelt on the ground, no longer as arrogant and insufferably arrogant as before. Originally, they thought that this battle would last until dawn or even longer. After all, there were 100,000 enemies here. Even if there were 100,000 pigs, it would be a laborious task to catch all of them. However, humans were often worse than pigs. At least pigs instinctively knew how to run when they saw danger, but humans would not because they had intelligence and brains and knew how to avoid danger. When they saw that there was no way to escape, they chose to surrender. Perhaps for some people, surrendering was shameful. But for the defeated soldiers, it was a very effective way to save their lives. In just over 4 hours, just after midnight, the 100,000 enemy soldiers were completely under the control of the mercenaries. They were all tied up with long ropes that had been prepared beforehand. Then, they were tied together like gourds. Their heads were lowered, and they looked like children who had done something wrong. Reporting to the 6th young master, the enemy camp has been controlled. More than 90,000 of them have been captured, 4,000 of them have been killed, and 5,000 have escaped. 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa walked in front of Yang Qindong and reported the results of the battle after a salute. Not seeing Wuxia report, Yang Qindong thought that he was injured and asked with concern, "Where is Regiment Commander Wu?" Reporting to the 6th young master, Regiment Commander Wu led the 1st Battalion to chase after the enemy. 3rd Regiment Political Commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo reported after Luo Pa. Chase after the enemy? They didn't catch Hun Sen. Yang Qindong's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately thought of a conclusion. Only when the enemy's main commander was escaping could Wuxia abandon his troops and choose to chase after him. Yes. This time, it was 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa who stood up to answer the question. At the beginning of the battle, the situation was too chaotic and some of the enemies escaped. I didn't expect Hun Sen to be among them. 6th young master, we ask for your forgiveness. 3rd Regiment also asks for forgiveness. Since Wuxia wasn't around, Political Commissar Chen Bo spoke on his behalf. What are you guilty of? Yang Qindong glared at them. You all have performed very well. It's normal for some of the enemies to escape in the chaos. We have limited manpower and can't defend against them. Besides, didn't Regiment Commander Wu chase after them? Maybe there will be some good news. Just as Yang Qindong finished speaking, a warhorse rushed over from afar. Then, he heard Wuxia's cursing voice. Damn it, your fighting ability is mediocre, but your escaping ability is top-notch. Fine, there's no need to guess. They must have failed to catch him. Sure enough, when Wuxia passed through the 1st and 2nd line of defense and arrived in front of Yang Qindong, he saluted with a black face. 6th young master, your humble servant is incompetent. We didn't catch Hun Sen. Did he really escape? Yang Qindong couldn't help but sigh. A vanguard general couldn't be underestimated. Otherwise, why didn't they catch 90,000 captives? Yes, he escaped. I chased after him with the 1st Battalion and killed more than 300 enemies. We also captured some captives, including Hun Sen's soldiers. They confirmed that he had escaped. Wuxia reported in a depressed tone. Then, Wuxia straightened his body. 6th young master, your humble servant requests to continue the chase with the 1st Battalion. No matter what, we have to kill this enemy general who looked down on us. Wuxia wasn't just saying. Before the battle, he had made a bet with the 2nd Regiment commander, Luo Pa, to see who could catch Hun Senator. He had never expected that it would end up like this. Well, there's no need to chase him. Besides, he can't run away. It won't be long before we kill our way into Phnom Penh City. At that time, we'll see how he can escape. As for now, immediately arrange for someone to send the captives back to Laos. There will be people there to meet you. 90,000 captives, and they're all strong laborers. I think Yu Qian will be very happy to receive them. Yang Qindong laughed. According to the intelligence, the entire Phnom Penh dynasty only had 400,000 soldiers, including 100,000 new soldiers. In one battle, they had destroyed a quarter of the enemy's forces. No matter how one looked at it, it was a great victory. Presumably, when the news spread out, many people would be blinded. The Battle of Jujing was equivalent to a blow to the Phnom Penh dynasty. It proved that the mercenary regime was sacred and inviolable, but at the same time, it exposed their position. Obviously, it was not realistic to launch a sneak attack next. But even so, Yang Qindong and the mercenaries were still very confident in their abilities. Wasn't the reason why they trained as if their lives depended on it? Wasn't it so that they could perform better on the battlefield? Hun Sen escaped. Relying on the fact that his mount was of a better breed, he ran very fast. He only dismounted when the warhorse started foaming at the mouth. At this time, he could already see the walls of the next city, Chuanlong. The mercenaries suddenly appeared in the country and defeated the 100,000 vanguard led by Hun Sen and Zhu Jing. The captives were more than 90,000. After Hun Sen personally confirmed the news, the Chuanlong city guard sent the news to the capital, Phnom Penh City. Along with the news, there was also the fact that Shangbing City was breached and 30,000 civilians were slaughtered. This was all spread by the people who were deliberately released by the mercenaries. There was absolutely no question about its reliability. The two news spread one after another in the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty, causing waves of panic among the people. The mercenaries were too powerful. In just a few days, they had conquered 2 cities, killed more than 100,000 people, and captured more than 100,000 people. Could the country's army defeat such an opponent? In Phnom Penh City, when the news arrived, it was not only the people who were panicking, but also some dignitaries. They knew that the mercenaries were very powerful. After all, this had been proven by the facts. Because of this, they took out their wealth to support the country's army, hoping that they could win the war with a generous reward. But now, reality had given them a big slap in the face. Everyone was silent at the same time. They also had doubts in their hearts. Was it right for them to support their country to go to war with the mercenaries? In the palace, the moment King Boromir received the news of the war, he sat there without moving for a long time as if he had been petrified. When he came back to his senses, he cursed. First, he scolded the mercenaries for not playing by the rules. They were clearly trying to keep the peace and were about to admit defeat. However, they suddenly sent out troops and caught them off guard with a sneak attack. Then, he scolded Hun Sen for his stupidity and incompetence. Hun Sen's 100,000 troops were completely defeated in less than 4 hours. How was he a vanguard general? He was clearly an idiot. When he thought about how this was caused by this person, he was even more furious. He could not wait to skin this person and pull out his tendons to relieve the hatred in his heart. He had cursed, but the situation would not change because of his curses. What to do next was ultimately up to him, the king. General Dagon, I will give you 150,000 soldiers to guard Chuanlong City. No matter what, you cannot let the mercenaries take a step forward. I will immediately send people to Siam and the Awad dynasty to ask for help. Since we are allies, they can't just stand by and watch us get beaten. Chapter 610. The alliance had become his last hope, and Boromir hoped that they would be willing to fight to the death and send troops to Laos. As long as they made a move, the mercenaries would be attacked from both sides. The mercenaries were likely to retreat. Then, it would be time for him to recover what he had lost and restore the prestige of the country. He quickly arranged for people to get reinforcements. Then, he fixed his eyes on Chuan Longcheng. Not only King Boromir, but many people in the entire Golden Border dynasty had their eyes on Chuan Longcheng. They wanted to see the result of the clash between the two armies. Would it be beneficial or disadvantageous? Laos. The news of the victory in the Battle of Jianghu City had finally spread. At first, it was just some gossip. There was no confirmation, but it had already shocked many nobles. Didn't they say that the mercenaries would not make a move? Didn't they admit defeat? Why did the battle start so soon? Before that, they did not receive any news at all. There was no lack of smart people among the nobles. They quickly remembered that the 20,000 Laotian mercenaries were transferred to the south. At that time, it was said that it was to eliminate bandits and to prevent the Golden Border dynasty's army from pressing on the border. Now, it seemed that it was just an excuse. They were probably already on the battlefield at that time. The nobles had bribed many Laotian mercenaries. After all, these people were born here. They had too many concerns and too many shortcomings. However, it was obvious that these people were also kept in the dark. They did not know their mission until the moment before the battle. At that time, because of the tight lockdown, they could not send back the news. So, what did this mean? Did the mercenaries know that they would interfere and were already on guard? Or was it all because of military needs? If it was the latter, of course, it did not matter. It was understandable that the army needed to lock down the news. However, if it was the former, would the nobles be dissatisfied with their interference in the mercenaries' affairs? Would they even be the next target of punishment? These nobles were originally people who had lost their power. They had inherited too many things from their ancestors. In fact, they were already in dire straits. If the mercenaries stepped on them at this time, how could they resist? While these people were in a state of panic, the news that the mercenaries had conquered Shangding and Jujing, killing tens of thousands of enemies and capturing 90,000 enemies was reported to the Yang dynasty. For a time, all the tianxia inns in the various cities were overcrowded. Many commoners squeezed into these inns to drink the free tea and listen to the literate people talk about the news over and over again. Their faces were filled with excitement and excitement. Under the influence of Yang Bao's public opinion, more and more people learned about the policies of Lao province. As Lao province's infrastructure was on the right track, more and more people had jobs and money to earn. Through the distribution of land to the rich, more and more people were able to live on land that belonged to them. As long as the people had land in their hands, they would feel at ease and satisfied. Although the Lao provincial government had only been established for a few months, it had already received the sincere support of many of the people. This time, when they learned that the mercenaries who were guarding the fruits of their victory had won a great victory, almost everyone was happy. If they won the war, it meant that the benefits in their hands would not be taken away at will. In front of a bright future, the Lansang kingdom could go to hell. In the past, this kingdom had not treated the people well. If they were allowed to kill their way back, wouldn't they return to the days when they did not have enough food to eat and clothes to keep warm? The people were the most direct in their actions. They did not care about right or wrong, good or bad. They only knew that if someone was good to them, they would be good to that person. Now that the Lao province's policies were on their side, naturally, they would side with the Lao province. In addition, there were the educated youths among them who were spreading the news every day. There were also the Han people who had gained more benefits from the war. Thus, the opinions of the people were surprisingly unified. In the afternoon when the news was published, at least 7,000 young people had signed up to join the army. They were using their actions to support the Lao provincial government. As the provincial governor, Wuxia Chronicles was very touched by the actions of the people. However, as a sub-province, there were strict regulations on the number of soldiers they could have. This was to prevent other provinces from secretly expanding. Thus, in the face of the enthusiasm of the people, Wuxia Chronicles personally received them at the square in front of the government building. He expressed his gratitude and stated that there was no shortage of people in the mercenary army. He also asked them to return first. If there was a need to recruit soldiers, Yang Baozhong would report it. As for the youths who did not want to join the army on a whim, he suggested that they sign up first to learn some basic military knowledge. If there was a need for soldiers, those with experience would naturally be given priority. After much persuasion, they finally managed to persuade more than 7,000 people to go back. This scene quickly spread throughout the entire Wanxiang city, causing many people to be shocked. In just a few short months, the Lao provincial government had already won the hearts of the people. It seemed like even the Lansang kingdom's most glorious period could not achieve this. With Wuxia Chronicles holding the fort and meticulous preparations, the provincial government was operating as usual. Other than continuously sending various war preparations to the front lines, they were fully focused on developing their businesses and infrastructure. Just like Crimson City, they were developing day by day. With the victory at the front lines, the nobles did not dare to make any sarcastic remarks and became much more obedient. The goods that were originally overstocked were also quickly sold out when the news of the victory at the front line spread. Since the mercenary army had expressed their determination to protect the merchant group, what else did they have to worry about? Even if they could not sell their goods to Phnom Penh, Siam, and Ava. But weren't there other countries and regions around them? Just Great Ming alone was a huge market, and it was enough for them to mess around. The merchants began to move. Every time they brought in goods, they would have to pay more tax. The money from the sale of goods could not be intercepted in Lao province, and all of it had to be handed over to Qian City after the transaction. However, the tax did belong to them, and they could use it to develop their businesses. Money made the world go round. The development of Lao province entered a faster track. However, in this era of rapid development, there was a sudden movement in Lankai City, which was south of Wanxiang City. The Siam Kingdom had sent out 200,000 soldiers and was about to attack the city. As the war progressed, the days passed, and Siam and Ava finally started to make their moves. This was especially so for Siam, whose territory was adjacent to Wanxiang City, where the Lao province government was located. When they received King Boromir's request for help, the higher-ups made the decision to send troops to Wanxiang City. King Ili Chi of Siam was a person with foresight. When Jiaoji was still around and sent troops to South Ming, his attention was already on this place. If not for the fact that he had to cross Lansang and Jiaoji to enter Great Ming, he would have already thought of sending troops to seize the resources of Great Ming. What happened next was beyond Ili Chi's expectations. Suddenly, a mercenary army appeared and defeated the seemingly strong Jiaoji. Then, the mercenary army took over Lansang and changed its name to Lao Province. This series of actions immediately made him feel nervous. Ili Chi was worried about the powerful military strength of the mercenary army. He was worried that they would use this opportunity to attack him. In all honesty, if he had such a powerful army, he would definitely not be soft-hearted. He would definitely raise his butcher's knife and slash down on the people and regions that he felt deserved it. He believed that he was not the only one who felt this way. The mercenary army would also feel the same way. Originally, he was thinking of how to fight his way out of this chaotic world, expand his territory, and create a great empire. However, the unexpected rise of the mercenary army forced him to give up on this idea. Instead, he thought of how to protect himself. This was the reason why Siam, Phnom Penh, and Ava formed an alliance. In other words, they felt the danger and huddled together to protect themselves. They were confident that with the alliance of the three countries, they would have considerable strength. Although it was not enough to destroy the mercenary army, it would at least make them feel pressured. What was unexpected was that not long after the alliance was formed, the Sorangan family incident occurred. While Ili Chi was scolding General Hun Sen for his stupidity, he was also paying close attention to the development of the situation. Fortunately, some news came not long after. The mercenary army suddenly stopped mentioning this matter, as if they had admitted defeat. However, why was his heart still unable to calm down? The facts proved that Ili Chi's intuition was right. On the surface, the mercenary army seemed to have admitted defeat. However, they had been gathering their forces secretly and launched an unexpected and swift attack. Not only did they occupy two big cities, but they also directly destroyed the 100,000 troops of the Phnom Penh dynasty. This weakened the strength of the enemy and showed the invincible and powerful side of the mercenary army. Ili Chi admired their actions, but at the same time, the pressure increased greatly. Today, the mercenary army was targeting the Phnom Penh dynasty. Would they target Siam tomorrow? Instead of letting the mercenary army approach step by step, it was better for them to take the initiative to attack, especially when the mercenary army was confronting the Phnom Penh army. If they suddenly attacked, their chances of winning would be much higher. Once they captured Wanxiang City, not only would they be able to obtain the wealth and various resources in the city, but it would also be tantamount to seizing the mercenary army's escape route. This would greatly relieve the pressure on the Phnom Penh dynasty. As for whether this would lead to the retaliation of the mercenary army. What a joke, they were already enemies. Was there a need to be afraid of such things happening? Siam's unannounced attack caused a wave of panic in Wanxiang City. The nobles who had become obedient began to move again. Some of them even began to secretly contact the special envoy sent by Siam. They seemed to have decided to side with the other party. Chapter 6:11. The higher-ups were in a state of panic. Some chose to contact the emissary to surrender, some were hesitant and wanted to wait and see. There were also those who firmly supported the emissary. For example, people like Long Qi and then Ong Si. As the governor of Laos, Yuan Shaoqian saw all of this. In addition to constantly sending people to capture Siamese spies, he also made preparations to defend the city. Now, he had a company, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Laotian mercenaries. If he used them well, it was not impossible to defend the city. Yuan Shaoqian had no intention of asking Yang Qindong for help. He was the one who agreed to blow up the Solingans matter. Now that he could not control the situation, he had to look for the person behind him. The arrogant Yuan Shaoqian would not do such a thing. He was actively preparing for the battle. He was also considering if he could send the 7,000 people who had signed up to the city tower. These people had already undergone 7 days of military training. Although they were still new recruits, they were not completely clueless. At least they knew what military orders were and what was forbidden. The situation in Wanxiang City became tense. However, most of the staff and officials of the provincial government were not afraid. They did not trust Governor Yuan, but they trusted the 6th young master. Since this battle was commanded by the 6th young master, he would not ignore the possibility of Siam sending troops. Now that the news had spread, it would not be long before the mercenary reinforcements arrived. Everyone seemed to believe that Yang Qindong would transfer the troops from Phnom Penh dynasty. However, after waiting for a long time, there was no news. As time passed, people began to waver. Below Chuanlong City, the main force of the mercenary army that everyone had placed their hopes on was now gathered. Yang Qindong was also standing in front of the temporary command center's sand table with a relaxed expression. He didn't seem worried at all because the attack in defense of Wanxiang City was about to begin. Are all the battalions and companies ready for battle? Yang Qindong retracted his gaze from the sand table and turned around to look at the 2nd Regiment Commander of the IC Blade Division, 3rd Regiment Commander Wu Sheng, and the Auxiliary Regiment Commander Lu Zhua. Everything is ready. We can attack the city at any time, Luo Pa said excitedly on behalf of the other officers. After he finished speaking, a look of struggle and hesitation appeared on his face, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. What's wrong? If there's anything you want to say, just say it. How are you hesitating like a regiment commander? Noticing the change in Luo Po's expression, Yang Qindong stared straight at Luo Pa, as though he could see through his thoughts. Yes. Luo Pa straightened his body. 6th young master, there's news that the Siam Kingdom has sent their troops to attack Wanxiang City. Is that true? That's not something you need to worry about. You just need to fight this battle well. Even though Yang Qindong knew that the officers were concerned about the overall situation, Yang Qindong still rejected them without hesitation. One had to be single-minded when doing things. On the battlefield, a small mistake could lead to serious consequences. Since that was the case, there was no point in thinking about things that were beyond one's control. Yes. Luo Pa, who was criticized by Yang Qindong, replied with a straight face. He only wanted to remind the 6th young master. He also knew that the most important thing now was to defeat the Golden Bian dynasty's army. Luo Pa was criticized, but Yang Qindong knew that this was not his idea alone, but that all of the officers probably had the same idea. It seemed that if he did not say a few words, these people would inevitably be distracted, and it would be difficult for them to concentrate. Well, young master has already made arrangements for Wanxiang City. You don't have to worry. If you're really worried, it's better to think about how to defeat the Golden Bian army quickly. As long as the war here is resolved, we can naturally turn back and give Siam a slap in the face. We'll let them know the consequences of provoking us. Yes, defeat Golden Bian and fight back against Siam. The regimental officers in the command center all said bluntly. Well, since everyone is ready, let's check our watches now. We'll launch the general attack in an hour. Yang Qindong raised his right arm, revealing the exquisite military watch on his wrist. At the same time, several regimental officers also looked at the military watch on their wrists. Chuanlong City. It was not a big city in the Golden Border dynasty, but because of its unique geographical location, beside the Mekong River and behind the Orange Well City, it became a strategic place and one of the front doors to enter the Golden Border city of the Golden Border dynasty. At this time, the 150,000 troops led by General Dan were guarding this place. General Hun Sen, who had retreated to this place, had been kidnapped and sent back to Golden Bien dynasty. 100,000 defeated soldiers, this was a crime that this general would have to bear. Once Hun Sen was punished, Dan's influence and strength in the army would rise to a new level. After all, no one would compete with him, and he would be worthy of being the boss. The army entered the city and took over the defense line of the entire city. Dagon also became the boss of the city. After inspecting the defense of the city tower, he returned to his temporary residence and called for a group of singers to sing a song. He crossed his legs and looked very leisurely. He had figured out the situation of the mercenaries these days. At most, there were only about 40,000 people. Their military strength was more than 3 times that of the enemy. With a strong city to defend, what was there to be afraid of? Even if the other party had some advanced firearms and cannons, he was not someone to be trifled with. He had already arranged for an inspection team of 10,000 people. As long as the soldiers did not flee, he was not afraid of the mercenaries with his advantage in numbers. Of course, what gave Dan confidence was that Siam had already sent troops. Now, he only needed to delay the main force of the mercenaries, and it would be a great victory. Once the Allies succeeded, the mercenaries would have no choice but to retreat. Now, his mission was to defend Longchuan City, and it would be a victory. The terrain here was very good. The west gate was next to the Mekong River, and the army could not be stationed there. The south gate led to the hinterland of the Golden Bien dynasty, and there would be no enemies. So, he only needed to defend the north and east gates. When the time came, the mercenaries would retreat, and it would be a victory. As for whether the enemy would attack the 2 gates, he would deal with it as it came. With such a thick city wall and so many soldiers, the enemy could not fly up. Besides, even if they relied on the advantage of the cannons to enter the city, so what? When the 2 sides fought, the power of the cannons would be limited. Then, it would be time for the enemy to counterattack with the advantage of numbers. Dan was very satisfied, especially after he kidnapped Hun Sen and sent him back to Golden Bien City. No one in the army could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. The feeling of being completely at ease, and the momentum of being a man of his word, made him feel like he was floating in the air. It was as if the world was in his hands. This feeling lasted until suddenly, the ground under his feet shook, and then it disappeared. Boom, 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 boom. Under the attack of the cannons, the entire Longchuan city was shaking. Some tiles on the houses fell to the ground like rain. The people in the streets were frightened by the loud roar, and they ran around like headless flies. It seemed that this was the only way to reduce the fear in their hearts. Reporting to the general, the mercenaries have started to attack the city. The north gate has been breached. Dan was also frightened by the deafening sound. Just as he got up and walked out of the courtyard, a guard knelt in front of him and reported a piece of unexpected bad news. What? The north gate has been breached? Dan felt like he was hit by a huge rock. He felt his vision turn black, and his legs went soft, and he was about to fall to the side. Fortunately, the guard reacted quickly and reached out to support him. General, what are you shouting for? I'm not dead yet. Dan woke up from the shaking and shouted, immediately send reinforcements to the north gate according to the plan. No matter what, we must take back the gate. At this moment, Dan realized that he had underestimated the enemy. He originally thought that the mercenaries were powerful because their opponents were too weak. Otherwise, why would they launch a sneak attack against the 100,000-strong army led by Hun Sen? If they really had the strength, why didn't they fight a fair and square battle? On the battlefield, underestimating one's opponent meant paying a heavy price. It could even be the price of one's life. After shouting these words, Dan looked at the guard who was still standing in front of him and could not help but be angry. Go and pass the order. At the same time, order the inspection team to block the enemy. Anyone who deserts will be killed. The army of the Golden Bian dynasty moved slowly. Under the general's order, tens of thousands of soldiers went straight to the North Gate, trying to regain control of it. At the North Gate, it was Chang Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment who attacked. He had just taken up the post of battalion commander not long ago, and this time, he was given the opportunity to lead the charge. Not only did he have the 400 cold vanguard warriors from the 3rd Battalion, there were also 2 auxiliary battalions, totaling more than 1,000 people. Under the accurate bombardment of the 100mm mortar, the North Gate was broken like a piece of paper. Then, with a fierce charge, they arrived at the North Gate. At this moment, the field of vision became wider. Battalion commander, the enemy is going to counterattack, and they have a lot of people. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Guofeng, smiled. During the charge just now, their company was the vanguard of the vanguard. They were the first to reach the North Gate, so they killed the most enemies. However, it seemed that this did not satisfy him. He held a machine gun and fired from time to time. Looking at his capable subordinate with a murderous expression, Chang Chunyang smiled and asked, "What's wrong? Did the battle just now scare you? There are thousands of enemies here. You killed so many people, are you still not satisfied?" Chapter 6:12. You want to scare me with a 1,000-man team? Battalion commander, I'm not bragging. Our company is the strongest. Even if we face a 10,000-man team, we won't frown. Guofeng said with some pride, and then half a magazine of bullets shot out. Hundreds of meters away, at least 4 or 5 enemies were knocked down to the ground. You're good. Since that's the case, then I'll allow you to continue charging. There are only 10,000 people on the other side now. I'll leave them all to you. Looking at Guofeng's boastful look, Chen Yangyuan wanted to kick him. But in the blink of an eye, he decided to provoke him and give him a slap in the face. Of course, Guofeng was bragging. 100 against 10,000, even if they had a powerful flintlock in their hands, it was difficult to do. Not to mention that the enemy was still carrying out a planned charge. Occasionally, the enemy's inspection team could be seen behind the army. With such a great achievement, the company dare not enjoy it alone. It's better to let the wise battalion commander lead us. Guofeng knew that he was bragging, but he didn't care. Instead, he said with a flattering look. In any case, they would often joke about such things in private. Humph, Chen Yangyuan snorted and didn't expose Guofeng's embarrassment. Instead, he said with a very serious expression, no matter how many enemies come, we have to kill them all. As long as we attract enough firepower from the enemy, the pressure on the commander's side will be reduced, and the faster it will be. Yes. When it came to serious matters, Guofeng also put away his cynical expression. He turned around and shouted to the soldiers around him while firing his gun, "Fire for me, don't be afraid of wasting bullets, and don't let the enemy counterattack. Shoot!" Bang bang bang, da-da-da, tut-tut-tut, all sorts of gunshots rang out, representing the sounds made by different firearms. Thousands of tongues of fire spewed out together, suppressing the enemy's charging force in an instant. When the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty fell down as if they were blown by a hurricane, the momentum of the attack began to slow down. Knowing that they would die if they rushed forward, no one would not cherish their lives. If it weren't for the inspection team behind them, they would have turned around and fled long ago. Gunshots were still ringing out from the North Gate, and the soldiers of Chuanlong City were rushing towards the North Gate to provide reinforcements. It was as if they would not stop until they had taken back the North Gate. While everyone's attention was on the North Gate, the attack on the East Gate began. Unlike the North Gate where there was only one cold vanguard battalion, the one leading the charge at the East Gate was the 3rd Regiment commander, Wu Sheng. This time, he had brought 2 main battalions, 4 auxiliary battalions, and 5,000 Laotian mercenaries. His goal was to charge into the city in one go to crush the enemy's morale and destroy their will to fight. The mission Yang Qindong gave them was to be like an arrow piercing through the clouds, tearing the enemy's defensive line in half, paving the way for the main force to enter the city. In order to better complete the sixth young master's mission, Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo decided to split up after a discussion. First, the 3rd Battalion, Spring Sun, would take down the North Gate and attract the enemy's main force. Then, they would rush into the East Gate and catch the enemy off guard. It seemed that this was the only way they could successfully enter the city and carry out the mission. Otherwise, if there were too many enemies, and they were all blocked together, it would be impossible to open a path in front of a sea of people. The plan went very smoothly. While the North Gate was busy fighting, the attack on the East Gate began. Furthermore, under the careful planning of the 2 main battalions, when the 40 rocket launchers directly smashed open the North City Gate, Wu Sheng led the mercenaries and charged in like an avalanche. Everyone was filled with murderous intent, and everyone rushed forward. The guns in their hands were constantly spewing flames, and they were like gods who had descended from the heavens. Whenever an enemy was in their line of sight, they would be hit by bullets as soon as they raised their swords and rushed forward. They would either die immediately or fall to the ground and cry out in pain. Along the way, they looked down on everyone. No one was their match, and no one could stop them. Dagon had already put on his armor and rushed to the North Gate under the protection of a group of bodyguards. Before he reached the city, a messenger reported that the East Gate had been breached. Quickly send people to block the East Gate. Don't let any enemy enter the city. With the previous example of blocking the North Gate, Dagon did not panic. In his opinion, even if he had to use human lives, he could still chase the mercenaries out of the city. At this moment, Dagon did not fully value the mercenaries. Or rather, he did not see the true strength of the mercenaries. He really thought that it was an ancient war where he could rely on numbers to turn the tide. He did not know that unless he could stop the mercenaries' charge in one go, the appearance of the mercenaries would only be a tactic of filling the gap. It was not effective at all. The battle at the East Gate was far more intense than the North Gate. One was defense, the other was offense, one was support, and the other was the main force. The situation was completely different. Before they could figure out the mercenaries' true intentions, groups of Golden Border Dynasty troops rushed to the East Gate and were eliminated one by one. When they sent out a 100-man team, they would be wiped out. When they sent out a 1,000-man team, they would be heavily injured. When the 2,000 inspectors arrived, all they saw was a street full of corpses and injured people lying on the ground. What they saw was the main force of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard charging towards them with guns in hand. Attack! Seeing that another group of enemies had appeared, and there were quite a number of them, Political Commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo took the lead. He held the 95 style in his hand and activated the burst mode. As he strode forward, he kept pulling the trigger. As soon as the inspection team saw the situation clearly and was about to turn around and retreat, intense gunshots rang out. The 2,000 people instantly scattered like a beehive that had been poked, leaving behind hundreds of corpses on the ground. In just one encounter, hundreds of corpses were left behind. This kind of strong combat power gave the inspection team a feeling of invincibility. In the past, others had always been in the front. Now that it was finally their turn, they felt the horror and strength of the mercenaries. Waves of enemies appeared at the East Gate one after another and were crippled one after another. Finally, it attracted Don's attention. He began to mobilize more and more soldiers to rush to the East Gate. He was delusional to use the tactic of numbers to drive the mercenaries out of the city. Guns are very powerful, but they will run out of gunpowder eventually. Don't be afraid, just rush forward. As long as you can kill one enemy, you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver. As long as you snatch a gun, you will be rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Afraid that the soldiers below would not use their full strength, Don led his men to the East Gate while constantly raising the bounty. He believed that under the stimulation of profits, there would definitely be people who did not care about their lives. As long as these people could rush to the front of the mercenaries, it would be time for their cold weapons to shine. When there is a great reward, there will always be brave men. This was undoubtedly a wise saying. Some people who chose to join the army were putting their lives on the line. They were already prepared to die. As the saying went, wealth comes from danger. In order to fight for a better future, many soldiers rushed toward Wuxing's second platoon like moths to a flame. Bam bam bam. Tat tat tat, the sound of gunshots continued. One by one, the enemies fell in the path of the charge. However, the momentum did not seem to have any intention of stopping. Many people were still moving forward with the help of their comrades' shadows. I only have one magazine left. When a cold vanguard warrior reached for his waist, he suddenly felt nothing and shouted subconsciously. I only have one magazine left too. I have two more. I don't even have one left. A cacophony of voices rushed into Wuxing's ears. While his face turned bitter, he could not help but turn around and shout, "Who told you to waste bullets like this?" Wuxing could not be blamed for saying this. Before the battle, every soldier had at least 2 basic sets of ammunition. For example, the 95 gun had 600 rounds of ammunition, a total of 20 magazines. At first, they thought it would be enough. Who would have thought that they would run out of ammunition so quickly? Alright, everyone, save your bullets. At the same time, equip your bayonets and prepare for close combat. Political Commissar Chen Bo also shook his head helplessly. There were too many enemies. From the moment they entered the city until now, they only had about 2,000 people, including the auxiliary soldiers. However, they had to face dozens of waves of enemies in turns. At least 20,000 to 30,000 enemies had been driven away, defeated, or killed by them. With such a glorious victory, it was reasonable that they did not have enough bullets. However, even if they did not have enough bullets, they could still fight in close combat. With their bone-deep training, they could even kill with cold weapons. The enemies would be terrified of them. Equip your bayonets. Commander Wuxing also knew that the situation was a bit critical. It was not the time to blame anyone, so he shouted loudly. Then he took out the bayonet from his waist and inserted it into the 95 gun. Suddenly, a flash of white light appeared, like a soldier standing in a standard military posture, majestic. Kill. As he sprinted forward, he fired the last bullet in his magazine. Wuxing led the 1st Battalion, 2nd Battalion, for support battalions, and 5,000 Laotian mercenaries as they charged forward. Rows of bullets were fired, and the enemies fell to the ground one after another. The morale of the Golden Bian Dynasty soldiers, who wanted to take the opportunity to fight for their lives, dropped, and then they quickly retreated. The people running at the front were better off, but the enemies running at the back were in trouble. They didn't even have the chance to turn around before the mercenaries caught up with them. Then, one by one, the enemies exposed from behind were stabbed by bayonets and fell to the ground, covered in blood. Chapter 613. With a single charge, the 2,000-plus enemy troops were scattered and disintegrated. But before Wuxing and the others could catch their breath, another team of 1,000 soldiers came from not far away. The two sides met in a narrow street in the city. Only the brave would win, and a chaotic battle ensued. At this moment, Ling Feng and the auxiliary soldiers fully utilized the 3-on-3 tactic. The 3 of them worked as one and launched a bayonet charge as if it was their daily training. Every time a dazzling white bayonet was thrust forward, an enemy would be stabbed and fall to the ground. Intestines and blood flowed everywhere. The brave mercenaries also led the 5,000 Laotian mercenaries behind them. They were originally armed with cold weapons, either broadswords or spears. At this moment, they finally came in handy. Following Ling Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, they also brandished their swords to kill the enemies, showing their strong combat power. The team of 7,000 people was like a torrent of steel, constantly killing the enemy and attracting the enemy's main force. After fighting for half an hour, the situation here finally attracted more soldiers of the Golden Bian Dynasty. Especially when they heard that the mercenaries did not have guns, some of them felt that the time had come, so they stopped going to the north gate and went to the east gate. The pressure at the east gate was getting stronger and stronger, while the pressure at the north gate was getting weaker and weaker. When Chunyang and the others launched another long-range shooting, they found that the number of enemies was rapidly decreasing. When they could no longer form a human wall in front of them, Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion decisively said to the correspondent next to him, "Go and inform the 6th young master, the time has come." Yes, the time had come. The first attack at the North Gate and the slaughter at the East Gate were all for the 3rd step, which was the joint attack of Lang Feng's 2nd Battalion, 14 auxiliary battalions, and the 15,000 Laotian mercenaries. Considering that there were 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty in the city, if they all attacked from one gate, it was likely that the gate would be blocked. In the end, they would block the way with only the corpses blocking the way. If that was the case, the enemies would have enough time to escape, which would not achieve the goal of severely injuring the enemy. Therefore, there were 2 waves of feints. Most of the enemies had gone over to the East Gate, leaving the North Gate empty. When Yang Qindong received the news, he immediately gave the order to launch an all-out attack. More than 20,000 mercenaries poured in from the North Gate, joining up with Spring Sun's Cold Vanguard 3 battalions as they rushed into Dragon River City. The 30,000-strong army was like a whirlwind, and no one could stop them. They used machine guns, submachine guns, and semi-automatic rifles to kill anyone who tried to get close to them. The North Gate suddenly became the main attacking force, which made Duane, who was rushing to the East Gate, turn pale with fright. This confusion confused him. Where exactly was the enemy's main force, and where should he place his troops to defend? At this time, the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty were in a mess. There were even some soldiers who had been rushing back and forth between the North and East Gates. Just as they were about to reach the East Gate from the North Gate, they received a military order to return to the North Gate. These generals were all puzzled and thought about the stupidity of the commanding general. However, they had no choice but to turn around and return to the North Gate. It was obviously too late to turn back now. The mercenaries had entered the city, and they were attacking while stabilizing their defense line. As they pushed forward step by step, the entire 5 streets near the North Gate were successfully taken over by them. After the first step, they began the second step of the attack. The mercenaries divided into more than a dozen teams in different directions, spreading rapidly to the surroundings like a spreading virus, and no one could stop them. A platoon could often be divided into groups. Once they met the enemy's 100-man team, they would raise their guns and fight. With the advantage of weapons, it was easy for a platoon to fight 100. Once they encountered a 1,000-man enemy, they would retreat while fighting, waiting for their enemies to drop dead bodies in the process. Often, as they fought, another mercenary squad would appear from another street. Then, they would launch a pincer attack from both sides. The enemy would become dizzy, the enemy would be at a loss, the enemy would be crying for their parents, and the enemy would be littered with corpses. More and more mercenary teams began to show their terrible lethality and destructive power, slowly giving the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty in the city a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere, and that there was nowhere safe. In such an environment, the enemy's morale was rapidly disintegrating. After more than 8 hours of resistance, before night fell, the tight string finally broke. The morale of the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty fell to the bottom at that moment, and a large number of defeated soldiers and deserters began to appear. The situation was irreversible. Under the blurred vision, the inspectorate could not see the situation on the battlefield clearly, and more people had the opportunity to escape. As some of the bolder ones took the lead to leave, more and more soldiers began to flee. Black shadows could be seen everywhere in the darkness. Some soldiers even sneaked away 20 meters in front of the inspectorate team. It was almost an open and above-board move. General Damon did not notice all of this. Since the mercenaries attacked at 1:00 in the afternoon until now, 4 or 5 hours had passed. He was panicking all the time, and now he finally had a chance to have a good rest. Under the protection of a group of guards, he leaned against a battlement at the corner of the street and fell asleep. The environment was not good, and there was not even a simple camp bed. However, to the exhausted General Dagon, this was nothing. All he needed was peace and quiet, that was all. In ancient times, people were malnourished and were prone to night blindness. In addition, it was difficult for people to recognize their comrades and enemies from a long distance in a night battle. Therefore, unless it was necessary, no army was willing to fight at night. In comparison, the mercenaries were naturally fearless. In fact, their daily training included night battle training. But tonight, when there was almost no moon in the sky, Yang Chendong made the unprecedented decision to let everyone rest. Although the battle during the day only lasted for an afternoon, because of the large number of enemies, the battle was very fierce from the beginning. This was especially true for the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. Not only did they use up all of their ammunition, but they also engaged in hand-to-hand combat. They were so good at using the 3-on-3 tactic that the enemies were terrified. Because of this, 1/3 of the soldiers in the 1st and 2nd Battalions were injured. Although most of the injuries were minor, if they were not treated in time, it would be easy for small problems to become big problems. With so many injured soldiers, they needed to rest. After the hard battle during the day, the soldiers of the 1st and 2nd Battalions also needed to rest. In addition, they had used up too much ammunition during the day, and urgently needed to replenish it. Yang Chendong simply gave the order for the entire army to rest. He believed that after a good night's sleep, the soldiers would be full of energy the next day and return to the fierce battlefield. Other than the soldiers who were in charge of night duty, most of the soldiers leaned on each other or found a relatively clean place to lie down and sleep. As the commander-in-chief, Yang Chendong did not rest with everyone. With the existence of the qi, he only needed to rest for 2 hours a day to recover to his peak condition. Occasionally, it was not a problem for him to not sleep for a night. Without rest, he led Beta Persei and some of the members of the 1st Guard Squad to walk through the streets that they had previously occupied. The entire street was still filled with the stench of blood. Although most of the corpses had been moved away, the blood could not be washed away in a short period of time. When the stench of blood was combined together, it was inevitable that it would give rise to a very unpleasant smell that made people want to vomit. Fortunately, it was not the first time that the soldiers of the Cold Front and the auxiliary soldiers were on the battlefield. Although the smell was unpleasant, it was not unbearable. Besides, why would people care about the smell when they were tired? In this way, under the unpleasant smell, the soldiers of the mercenary army fell asleep everywhere in the streets and alleys. They were not cut down to the ground, but they were so tired that they simply found an open space to sleep. In the battle during the day, the army of the Golden Bien dynasty showed a strong resistance. Dawn was indeed worthy of the title of the first general. His tenacious fighting spirit made the mercenaries put in a lot of effort. Coupled with the role of the inspectorate, they fully showed the demeanor of a strong second-class army. Previously, Yang Chendong divided the army into 4 classes. The strong Cold Front was the first class. When the number of enemies was too high, a second-class army was enough to threaten a first-class army. This battle was a bit difficult, so it was reasonable that the soldiers were tired. Walking on the street, Yang Chendong's eyes were filled with adorable and tired soldiers. Once he noticed that a soldier's hands and feet were exposed outside of the blanket, Yang Chendong would step forward and help cover them up again. If the soldiers knew about this scene, they would be extremely excited. After all, it was their 6th young master who personally helped them to tuck in the corners of their blankets. Yang Chendong wasn't the only one who helped. Yang Chendong, who was beside him, and the members of the 1st Guard team who followed him also helped. There were too many soldiers and they were too tired. Except for the Cold Front, who was equipped with a sleeping bag and did not need to worry about catching a cold, the auxiliary soldiers and the Laotian mercenaries did not have such conditions. While covering the soldiers with the quilt, Yang Chendong said to Beta Persei beside him, "Tomorrow, arrange for people to go to Resin City and have them produce more sleeping bags. Our soldiers can't fall sick because of lack of rest. This is a great injustice to them." "Young master, I will remember." Beta Persei nodded heavily. This was the young master's concern for the soldiers. Such an order must be passed down as soon as possible. Chapter 6:14. There is a price to pay for hard work. At the same night, One side's commander was sleeping soundly with countless deserters under his command. The other side's commander was running on the path of caring for the soldiers. The soldiers had a good rest, and when the new day came, they would be more powerful. From this point of view, the outcome was clear. The sky finally brightened. Beta Persei, who was beside Yang Qindong, had been replaced by Tiger's Mane. He was busy making a bowl of hot porridge and sending it over. Sixth young master, the porridge just came out of the pot. Try it. Okay. Yang Qindong took the porridge, took a sip, and sighed, it tastes good, and it has a lot of calories. Very good. He. Although the porridge was not made by himself, Tiger's Mane grinned when he saw that Yang Qindong was satisfied. By the way, have the other soldiers drunk? Yang Qindong just sighed and then focused on the soldiers. They are all queuing up to drink. By the way, young master, the scouts have sent information that at least half of the enemies escaped last night. Today's battle should be much easier. When it came to business, Tiger's Mane also restrained his smile and changed into a serious look. Well, this time the enemy is more stubborn, and their strength is still barely enough. Fighting with such an enemy will be of great help to improve the combat power and will of the soldiers. But at the same time, this is also the main force of the Gilded Dynasty. According to the intelligence of the Security Bureau, defeating them is equivalent to breaking their backbone. It will be much easier to conquer them next. At this point, Yang Qindong raised his head and poured the entire bowl of porridge into his mouth. At this time, he had a heroic aura on his face. Pass down the order. We'll launch the attack in half an hour. Deep in Chuanlong City. Compared to Yang Qindong's heroism and hot-bloodedness, Dagon's face was filled with rage. Who would have thought that after he woke up from his sleep, he would realize that more than 50,000 of his soldiers had run away in just one night. Including those who had died on the battlefield yesterday, he now had less than 50,000 soldiers that he could use. What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to open the South City Gate? Where did those people escape from? Don't tell me all 50,000 of them jumped down from the tower? Dagon asked in disbelief. If it was only a few hundred soldiers using ropes and other objects to escape from the city gate tower, he could still understand. However, how could he accept the fact that 50,000 people escaped in one night? The bodyguard who was asked had a bitter look on his face. Knowing that the general was angry, not only could he not leave, but he could only stay here and explain. Thus, he carefully answered, General, it was the captain guarding the southern gate who opened the gate and escaped, so, bastard. After hearing the explanation, Dagon raised his leg and kicked him. The bodyguard who was half kneeling was unlucky. He fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Ignoring the soldier's pain, Dagon pulled out the saber on his waist and roared, so what if 50,000 people escaped? I still have 50,000 men, which is more than the mercenaries. Today, I will fight them to the death. Dagon's words were filled with pride, but the dozen or so bodyguards beside him all fell to their knees and pleaded, General, you can't do that. Now that the morale of the army is low, and the soldiers are exhausted. We can't fight anymore. Where there's life, there's hope. General, please take a step back and regroup. If we fight again another day, we will definitely win. There's an imbalance of power between us and the enemy. You can't use force, General. General, please reconsider. The bodyguards made all kinds of sounds. Their purpose was the same, which was to persuade Dagon to retreat. The army had lost its morale. If they fought now, they would only suffer heavy losses. Yesterday, they had 150,000 men, but they did not gain the slightest advantage. They lost tens of thousands and injured tens of thousands. They did not think that they could defeat the mercenaries with only 50,000 men. The bodyguards were not afraid of death, but they thought that it was not worth it to die in such a bloody battle. It would be better to take a step back and fight again after the army was reorganized. That way, the chances of winning would be much higher. You guys? At first, Dagon was unafraid of death, but the bodyguards seemed to be in the same tone. They kept persuading him, which made Dagon's momentum stagnate. Then, his head drooped down like a lifeless puppet. How could Dagon not know that it would be foolish of him to fight the mercenaries under such circumstances? But he was not willing to give up. The 150,000 men under him were the most elite force of the Golden Bian dynasty. With more than 3 times the number of men, the defense of the city wall, and their familiarity with the terrain, they could not defeat the mercenaries. He really did not know how to win. He had a feeling that once he gave up here, it would be difficult to defeat the mercenaries again. But if he continued to fight, how could he win with insufficient troops and low morale? If he retreated, it would be difficult to win. If he fought, he might be wiped out. This was a dilemma to begin with. But he still had to make a choice. Dagon sighed and the sword in his hand fell to the ground. Forget it, forget it. If that's the case, let's retreat. Inform the soldiers in the city to withdraw as much as possible. Then prepare to set fire. Even if we leave, we can't let the enemy have a good time. Dagon finally made the decision to retreat, which made the bodyguards happy. This proved that they did not have to die, so they nodded and agreed. But before they could pass the order, the familiar gunshots suddenly sounded, and then became more and more frequent. It seemed that they were not far away. Not good, the mercenaries are attacking. General, let's go, or I'm afraid it's too late. The bodyguards heard the gunshots that were getting closer and closer. Their faces changed drastically, and they rushed to Dagon's side. If he did not retreat, they would carry him and retreat. Retreat. Dagon wanted to say something tough, but he did not know why. When he heard the gunshots, he was a little scared. Perhaps it was the psychological trauma left by yesterday's battle. But since the enemy had attacked, and he was not fully prepared, it would be meaningless to continue fighting. It was better to retreat now and save some strength anyway. Dagon escaped, and before he left, he gave the order for the entire army to retreat. However, because the mercenaries had launched their attack too early, and because they had replenished their ammunition, many of the enemies were caught before they could escape. In the end, only 20,000 of the 50,000 managed to escape. After General Dagon fled, the mercenaries did not pursue, but began to clean up the enemy forces in the city. The battle lasted from morning to night, and the situation was basically stabilized. Compared to yesterday, Lang Feng did not have any casualties today, and only 3 soldiers were slightly injured. 13 auxiliary soldiers were killed, and 100 were injured. More than 100 Laotian mercenaries were killed, and more than 1,000 were injured. In exchange, they captured more than 40,000 enemies and killed more than 10,000 enemies. In addition to yesterday's battle, they killed more than 30,000 enemies and captured 50,000 enemies in the Battle of Chuanlong City. More than half of the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Border dynasty were killed, and 80,000 of them were killed. Hurry up and search for anything edible and useful in the city. The troops will rest as they move. We will rest for one more night. Tomorrow morning, we will move towards Su Weng City. After Yang Chendong received the final battle statistics, he immediately issued a new order. In the morning of the second day, the main force of the mercenaries went straight out of Longchuan City, and in just 2 days, they arrived outside Su Weng City. Su Weng City was one of the biggest cities in the Golden Border dynasty, and it was an important crossroad to the capital of the Golden Border dynasty. From here, one could enter Golden Rim City from Pingzhan City in the north. One could also enter Bolomian City in the east. It could be said that once this place was taken, the initiative would change hands, and Golden Border City would face the possibility of being besieged at any time. The news spread like the wind to the south, and when it reached Golden Border City, King Boromir was so shocked that he almost fell off his dragon throne. The civil and military officials didn't have a good reaction either. Some of them were pale because of fear, some of them were red because of anger, and some of them clenched their fists because they wanted to go to the front lines and fight to the death with the mercenaries. Their reactions were different, but the same thing was that they all felt the existence of danger, and the feeling of a knife on their necks. Trash. Trash. What the hell is Dagon doing? 150,000 people can't even stop 40,000 from the enemy? Didn't he claim to be the #1 general of our country? Is this how he behaves? After digesting the defeat at the front line, Boromir roared. He was just venting out the dissatisfaction in his heart. Then, he began to read out the royal orders regarding the current situation. First, send the army forward to meet up with General Dagon, who was setting up defenses in Suwon City. Although the general did not perform well in the Battle of Longchuan City, now was not the time to punish him, and he had to be used to stop the mercenaries. Second, urge the two allies, Siam and Ava, to send out their troops quickly. If they did not send out their troops, the Golden Border dynasty would be gone, and the alliance would cease to exist. At this moment, the Siam army and flag could be seen outside the south gate of Wanxiang City, the capital of Laos province. Siam had sent 100,000 soldiers to Wanxiang City earlier than King Boromir had expected. Behind them, there were another 100,000 soldiers in Wulong City, the largest city in the north of Siam. They could provide reinforcements at any time. The general leading the army was named Godin. He was the representative of the younger generation of the Siamese military. He was only 35 years old, but he was already the commander of an army of 200,000. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was favored by the king. Chapter 6:15. Riding on a horse, dressed in a general's armor, Lan Sang's face was full of confidence. Below Wanxiang City, Godin was full of pride and arrogance. Beside Godin was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. This person was like a ghost who always made the right choice on the battlefield, escaping the pursuit and punishment of the mercenaries time and time again. This time, Fan Yuhai followed the Siam army and brought along 5,000 elite cavalrymen. After many rounds of elimination, the remaining 5,000 were undoubtedly the best of the best. According to Yang Chendong's evaluation, they had surpassed the standard of a second-class army and were moving towards a first-class army. General Fan, how long do you think it will take for our army to conquer Wanxiang City? With an arrogant expression, Godin raised his head as he spoke, as if he would not be able to match his status if he did not do so. General Fan, the Siam army is made up of elite soldiers. It's just a small Wanxiang City, we should be able to conquer it in less than 3 days. Fan Yuhai's face was calm and even seemed a little low-key. He was not as arrogant as Godin, but even so, he had a dazzling aura and was not to be underestimated. Ha ha ha. Hearing Fan Yuhai's reply, Godin laughed out loud. All right, I'll take your blessings. Come on, charge and conquer Wanxiang City within 3 days. Then, I'll allow you to conquer the city for 1 day. Conquering the city for 1 day meant that within 1 day after conquering the city, the soldiers could take whatever they wanted. As long as they took it, it would belong to them and they would not have to hand it over. This was a special reward for the soldiers. Kill, kill, kill. When the soldiers heard the benefits promised by the general, they all roared loudly, bursting with a strong fighting spirit and morale. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, the governor of Laos, Wan Shaoqian, was supporting himself on the battlements. His eyes were filled with determination as he looked at the 100,000 Siam soldiers below the city. The speed of the Siam army's appearance was far beyond Wan Shaoqian's imagination. However, he was not afraid. Not to mention the strong confidence that Yang Chendong brought him, he himself had a strong confidence at the moment. All of this came from the company of Ling Feng, 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers and the 10,000 Laos mercenaries led by General He Guang. With a strong city and 10,000 strong soldiers by his side, Wan Shaoqian had no reason to be afraid of the 100,000 Siam soldiers. Furthermore, the 6th young master would soon hear about what happened here. He only needed to defend for a while and reinforcements would arrive. That would be the moment of victory. Everyone, get ready for battle. Ling Feng and the auxiliary troops, aim and shoot. Whoever dares to approach the catapults will die. Standing below the city gate tower, Wan Shaoqian, who was only 18 years old, had a bright light flashing in his eyes. His body was full of fighting spirit. When he was in Crimson Castle, he had the experience of training auxiliary soldiers. During the Battle of Ryukyu Island, he had also participated in the battle as a political instructor. He was no longer a war newbie. At this moment, he was not afraid. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit and vigor. After receiving the order, Ling Feng and the auxiliary soldiers on the city wall immediately looked for the best shooting position and aimed at the slowly approaching catapults. Catapults were a siege weapon that had been around for a long time. They had always been used to break through a strong city. They could throw out huge rocks in an instant. When the rocks hit the ground, they could cause great damage. It was extremely useful for suppressing the enemy's attack or destroying the enemy's defense. Of course, such a war weapon had its fatal weakness. For example, if the attack distance was too short, its strength would decrease after a mile and it would not be able to use its advantage. Another example would be the lack of accuracy when attacking the target. Often, when a rock was thrown out, it would not be able to predict where it would fly. Most of the time, it depended on luck. Even so, catapults were still widely used. It was because the technology was too simple. Usually, the armies of small countries would use it. It was not like artillery, which required a large amount of manpower, resources, and energy. Even if Qiqian City was powerful, the current arsenal was still unable to produce artillery. The best they could do was make some grenades and landmines. All the artillery they used now came from a large warehouse. Fortunately, after obtaining the advanced books from Yang Chendong, the munition factory in Crimson City had no problems producing shells of various calibers. Their research on cannons had also made some progress. Given enough time, it was only a matter of time before the cannons were born. The Siamese army did not have any cannons. The mercenaries stationed in Wanxiang City also did not have any cannons. Yang Chendong would not be at ease leaving such powerful weapons anywhere unless he had a strong military force. Otherwise, if this matter was leaked out, it would not be helping Laos but harming it. There would be people who would think of ways to deal with it. The chances of them being targeted would only be higher. There were no cannons, but there were still 10 Type 40 rocket launchers, hundreds of artillery shells, grenades, and landmines. Wan Shaochen had already buried the landmine 300 meters away from Wanxiang City's southern gate. He had led the entire Ling Feng company to set them up at night. Even many officials in the provincial government did not know about this matter. At a distance of 300 meters, the sound of an explosion would not affect the soldiers guarding the city and could even kill the enemy. It couldn't be any better. However, this was just a method. The real battle depended on the performance of both sides. How to prevent the enemy's catapults from getting close to the city and not letting them do their job was the most important thing in a city defense battle. 1 li was 500 meters. At such a distance, if it was a cold weapon battle, it would be impossible to do anything. As the defending side, no matter what kind of bow and arrow they used, they would not be able to hit the catapults from such a distance. They could only shrink back and let the enemy attack. Since the enemy could not hit accurately, it was all about luck. The same thing happened to the mercenaries, but it was different. They had the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, which could easily hit the catapults up to 600 meters away. Naturally, they had the ability to control the catapults. What they needed to do now was to prevent the enemy from getting close. Wan Shaochen gave the order. The Ling Feng Company and the auxiliary soldiers, who were in charge of the first batch of attacks, looked for the best positions. They focused their attention and waited for the enemy's catapults to get closer. In their line of sight, the catapults with large wooden wheels were slowly approaching. As long as they got close enough, they would be able to hit the catapults with boulders. Regardless of the effect, at least the momentum would be there. Then, when the soldiers charged with all their might, if they were lucky, they would be able to set up scaling ladders. Perhaps they would be able to take down the city tower in one go. If they were unlucky, it would be a battle of distance. In the end, the weaker side would be the winner. 700 meters, 650 meters, a soldier from the Ling Feng Company made a judgment with his sharp eyesight. His voice was heard by his comrades. Even if the catapults were 700 meters away, they would still be able to hit them with their rifles. However, they did not do so in order to pursue accuracy. They did not want to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, 620 meters. 600 meters, fire. When the Siamese soldiers finally reached the optimal firing range, gunshots rang out. Because it was daytime, they couldn't see the gunfire clearly, but the sound of gunfire did not stop. Then, the Siamese soldiers around the catapults fell to the ground one by one as if they had been bewitched. Is this the power of the new repeating rifles? Not bad. Riding on his horse, General Gordon squinted his eyes with an arrogant expression. Then, his surprise turned into excitement. Before they came, the military had obtained some information about the mercenaries. Naturally, they could not hide something like the rifles from them. After meeting Fan Yuhai, he had a better understanding of the situation. The first time he met Fan Yuhai, he was indeed shocked. At the same time, his greed was completely ignited. In Gordon's eyes, he had brought 100,000 soldiers with him and could mobilize another 100,000 soldiers behind him. However, dealing with Wanxiang City, which only had 10,000 soldiers, was as easy as using a cannon to kill a mosquito. In fact, he even thought that the moment he arrived with his army, the domineering aura would cause the mercenaries to immediately open the city and surrender. Things didn't go as he expected, but Gugu wasn't too disappointed. Are you not convinced? Want to fight? Then I'll beat you until you're convinced. I'll beat you until you can't fight anymore. From the perspective of a victor, the enemy's belongings would eventually belong to him. Didn't that mean that after he won, these repeating rifles would also become his spoils of war? He thought that once he had all these and the number of troops, he would become an invincible army. At that time, Siam would inevitably become the core of this region and enjoy a glorious situation like the Great Ming Dynasty where thousands of countries came to pay homage to it. As the general who had made the greatest contribution to the war, wouldn't he also have great power and authority and be respected by everyone? Gordon, who was still in a state of fantasy, was quickly interrupted by Fan Yuhai. General Gordon, did you see that? The repeating rifles of the mercenaries are very powerful and accurate. It's time to send in the Iron Shield soldiers. Fan Yuhai continued to tell the secret of the Iron Shield's ability to block bullets to the Siam Kingdom, just like how he told the destroyed Lansang Kingdom. Back then, he organized a battle to attack and defend Hanoi City. Now, he was going to do the same to attack and defend Wanxiang City. The difference was that Wan Shaochen, who was also a provincial governor, was very careful. He guarded every city gate and made it impossible for them to launch a sneak attack. They had no choice but to attack the city openly. Chapter 6:16. However, it did not matter. This time, Siam had mobilized 150,000 soldiers, which was far more than the Lansang Kingdom had mobilized previously. As for the 5,000 cavalrymen that he brought with him, they were there as bystanders. If everything went well, he would not mind getting a share of the loot. If not, he would run as fast as he could. In short, he would not let the mercenaries catch him. Not bad. Men, order the Iron Shield soldiers to lead the charge. Although Gordon was unhappy that Fan Yuhai had disrupted his fantasy, this was a war. Every soldier that died was another loss. Hence, he decided to listen to Fan Yuhai and send out the Iron Shield soldiers. Iron shields that were more than 8 centimeters thick could block bullets from muskets. Iron shields that were more than 10 centimeters thick could also block bullets from muskets in close combat. This had been proven countless times. Before the war, Siam had mobilized a lot of resources and gathered a lot of blacksmiths in the country to forge 5,000 iron shields. The shields were held by 5,000 strong men to defend against the enemy's muskets. Under Gordon's command, the 5,000 iron shield soldiers appeared. Once the 1.5-meter-tall iron shield was set up, it could cover their entire body and protect them from the threat of firearms. It's the Iron Shield soldiers. On the city wall, the Leng Feng soldiers cried out in shock. However, that was all they could do. They were not worried. They did not forget that Governor Xiaowan had led them to bury many mines. Those were the best weapons against the Iron Shield soldiers. The Iron Shield soldiers can only protect a portion of the people. Look for opportunities to attack those who are not protected. Yuan Xiaoqin's expression did not change as he spoke calmly. What happened this time was a test for him. If he could fend off Siam's attack, he would not only be an outstanding local governor, but also a capable general. His knowledge of both civil and military affairs would allow him to walk a better and broader path in the future. The general did not panic and the soldiers were confident. Ling Feng and the auxiliary soldiers began to look for opportunities to fire continuously. Although this could not stop the enemy from approaching, it was still able to eliminate the enemy's strength to a certain extent. At the same time, it was also a considerable deterrent. Once the shield was out, the gunshots continued. Compared to before, it was much more sporadic. Gordon, who was on his horse, laughed. He could bear such a loss. As long as the main force of the army could approach the city walls, with the help of the trebuchets, their morale would definitely soar. Perhaps if they were lucky, they would be able to seize control of the city walls after a few attempts and obtain the final victory. After the Siamese soldiers threw down hundreds of corpses, the catapults were finally positioned at a distance of 500 meters. Then, boulders were lifted out of the catapults. With the help of levers, the boulders flew into the air and smashed towards Wanxiang City. From afar, the momentum was astonishing, but the weakness was also very obvious. Out of 10 boulders thrown out, it was already very good if one of them hit the city tower. Most of them hit the city wall, causing the ground to shake, but it did not affect the overall situation. But it had to be said that the trebuchet's momentum was still very impressive. Under its encouragement, more and more Siamese soldiers followed behind the shield-wielding soldiers and began to move forward step by step. Sure Air could even see the appearance of scaling ladders through the cracks. This was a great tool for climbing the city walls. Hit them. Hit them hard. Above the southern city wall, Yuan Xiaoqin could clearly see the enemy slowly approaching because of the high ground. The shield could only protect the front of the soldiers and not the top of their heads. Therefore, the enemy's head was clearly displayed in front of the defenders. They did not even need to aim. All they needed to do was fire a shot at the top of the enemy's head, and one of them would die. This made Cold Vanguard's auxiliary soldiers feel very good. However, they were more excited to see what would happen when the enemy entered the 300-meter-long defensive line. 50 meters left, 30 meters left, 10 meters. Ling Feng was still using his vision to estimate the enemy's position. Boom, 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 boom. Finally, when the first row of shield bearers crossed the 300-meter battle line, the mines were triggered, and a loud explosion rang out. The powerful force blasted the shield bearers away, and the huge force sent countless people into the air. The aftermath of the explosion was like a huge wave on the sea, overturning the mountains and overturning the seas, throwing one enemy after another to the ground. At this moment, the Siamese army suffered heavy losses. Not only were more than half of the 5,000 shield-wielding soldiers killed, but most of their shields were also blown into pieces. The Siamese soldiers behind the shield-wielding soldiers were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. Hit them. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. We still have a lot of ammunition in the palace. Hit them hard. Yuan Xiaoqin also took a 95-style pistol and opened up a burst of fire towards the city walls. Ling Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, who were originally in charge of the replacements, were also mobilized. The 900 soldiers were firing at full capacity. At this moment, they were fighting to their heart's content and killing to their heart's content. Under the dual threat of landmines and muskets, the Siamese soldiers, who had lost thousands of soldiers, lost their morale and began to retreat. They trampled over each other as they retreated. Many soldiers died at the feet of their comrades. In such an environment, those who were pushed to the ground would never get up again. How did this happen? How did this happen? What the hell was that thing that exploded? What was that? Seeing his soldiers falling to the ground in droves and turning into corpses, seeing the metal shields being thrown all over the place, some of them even deformed, and seeing the majestic army retreating like frightened rabbits, Gordon was enraged. He turned and stared at Fan Yuhai. His eyes were red and burning with rage. Fan Yuhai was also shocked by the scene before him. He had not seen the mercenaries use such weapons in the previous battles, so he was not prepared. He had forgotten that most of the previous battles were sieges. The use of landmines was naturally limited. In the only battle of Hanoi City, he did not want to destroy the commercial street. Moreover, the Jiaoji army was charging ferociously and did not have time to plant landmines. Hence, he did not use them. However, it did not mean that they could not be used. Now, they finally came in handy. They caught the Siamese army off guard and dealt a heavy blow. The effect was shocking. These are landmines. Actually, the Ming dynasty has used them before, but they were not this powerful. Fan Yuhai was indeed a famous general in Jiaoji. He quickly thought of the deceased generals Wang Gingwang and Chen Heijin. Both of them had encountered such things in the rainforest. They even said that the mercenaries called them landmines. They were powerful weapons that would explode upon contact. Didn't this match what was happening before him? Landmines? Since you knew, why didn't you say so earlier? Gordon continued to blame him. Obviously, he did not want to bear the consequences of losing the first battle. He wanted to push all the blame to someone else. Fan Yuhai did not answer. Instead, he looked to the front and said calmly, "General Gordon, let's retreat first. There is no one controlling the catapults. The morale is low. Let's regroup and prepare for battle." Following Fan Yuhai's gaze, Gordon noticed that his trebuchets had stopped working and the soldiers in front of the trebuchets were all lying on the ground. It was obvious that this was the result of the continuous firing of the flintlocks. They had lost the first battle just like that. Although Gordon didn't want to admit it, he knew that this wasn't the time for loyalty. He could only grit his teeth and say helplessly, "Beat the gong to retreat." Retreat 5 miles. The Siamese army retreated. They did not even want the bodies of the soldiers, catapults, and shields. The resources were all within the firing range of the mercenaries' muskets. Who could snatch them back? Unless they launched an all-out attack. However, if the problem of landmines was not solved, could they really do it? Victory. The enemy ran away with their tails between their legs. On the south wall of Wanshang City, when the Siamese army retreated, cheers erupted like a tsunami. It was like a farewell song, mocking the incompetence of the Siamese army. Don't move. Soldiers, go down and clean up the battlefield. Bring back those that can be brought back, and burn those that can't. Wan Xiaoqin's face was flushed with excitement. However, as the commander, he suppressed his excitement and spoke calmly. They could only send the soldiers down because the landmines were not completely destroyed. If they sent someone else, the landmines might explode and cause unpredictable consequences. After that, the soldiers of Cold Vanguard carried barrels of kerosene out of the city. There were too many enemy corpses, and the best way to collect them was to burn them all. Otherwise, with so many corpses, it was inevitable that germs would appear and cause a plague. The Siamese army, which had already retreated, could only watch helplessly as the mercenaries carried out their operations below the city walls. They had tried to wreak havoc earlier, but they were quickly met with a barrage of gunfire from the top of the city walls. They had no choice but to retreat after throwing down hundreds of fresh corpses. This made General Gordon even angrier. He stomped his feet and cursed in the barracks at the back. However, there was nothing he could do. "General Gordon, please don't be angry. The most important thing now is to find a way to destroy their landmines. Otherwise, we will be in a passive position." Fan Yuhai was not a subordinate of Gordon and he had his own 5,000 cavalrymen. Although he did not have a large number of soldiers, he was powerful. When he faced Gordon, he naturally said whatever he wanted to say. He felt detached from the situation. Solve? How? It would have been better if he did not mention it. When he mentioned it, Gordon was furious. Before the battle started, Fan Yuhai said that conquering Wanxiang City would be a piece of cake. Why didn't he say that there were landmines? He caused Gordon to lose thousands of men and horses in the first battle. He even lost 2/3 of his iron shields that could block muskets. Now, he had less than 2,000 iron shields. His preparations were destroyed in an instant. He was in a passive position now. Chapter 6:17. We have to come up with a solution. Fortunately, we are the ones attacking and the enemy won't dare to attack us. We still have the initiative. We have time to think of a solution. Fan Yuhai frowned. Gordon claimed to be a famous general in Siam, but his temper was a little too bad. On the battlefield, victory and defeat were common. If they lost this time, they would find the reason and win the next time. What was the use of getting angry? All right, let's think of a solution quickly. I can't wait to attack Wanxiang City. Not only will I kill the mercenaries guarding the city, but I won't let the civilians off either. I want them to die. I want them to be terrified. In the future, if anyone mentions my name, they will have to keep quiet and avoid me. Gordon, who was still in a state of rage, had a furious look on his face as if he was really infuriated. Wait. On the other hand, Fan Yuhai wasn't affected by Gordon's emotions. Instead, he was moved after hearing Gordon's words. After about 3 breaths, he suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. Yes, that's it. I've already thought of a way to break the enemy's landmines. Seeing that Fan Yuhai had come up with a solution so quickly, Gordon looked at Fan Yuhai in confusion, as if saying, "Can you do it or not? Don't try to fool me with a random solution and make me lose more soldiers." "General Gordon, didn't you mention the civilians just now? Let's let the civilians walk in front. Do you remember what I told you a while ago? Look for the civilians in Siam. As long as we gather them and push them to the front line, they will step on the landmines. Won't we be able to break the enemy's formation easily?" Fan Yuhai laughed. Gordon was the best at making use of the civilians. He used this method when he was fighting with the mercenaries previously. However, he was confused by the mercenaries' retreat. Then, his plan was broken during the counterattack at night. He had no choice but to give up on this idea. This time, with so many landmines in front of him, he couldn't help but think of this matter again. Moreover, he could guarantee that this method would be effective this time. Gordon was also a demon who killed without batting an eyelid. Not to mention the Hans, he would not hesitate to sacrifice his own citizens or even his own soldiers. Hence, he would definitely not reject such a method to make use of the Hans. Good. General Fan is indeed smart. Since that's the case, this general will immediately give the order to gather all the Han citizens in the nearby cities and send them to the front lines. When Gordon heard Fan Yuhai's words, he had really arranged for his men to count the number of Han citizens in his territory. However, it was just a count. The arrogant him did not think that he would need to use any methods to deal with the 10,000 plus mercenaries. However, it was different now. The appearance of landmines gave him a huge headache. Since the Han people were useful, he would capture all the people who did the statistics. However, this would take a few days. Gordon thought that he had grasped the method to deal with the mercenaries. However, what he did not know was that as his troops approached Wanxiang City, he initiated a provocation. This was equivalent to giving the mercenaries an excuse to deal a heavy blow to Siam. Some people would ask, Yang Chendong is leading the 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division into the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty. Most of the Navy's Cold Front Division can only be on duty at sea. Now that Wanxiang City is under siege by the enemy, where are the soldiers coming from? Don't forget, before the war started, when the matter with the Solangan family was still brewing, Yang Chendong had disappeared for a period of time. It was during that period of time that he had already set up a trap for Siam. At that time, He thought that once the mercenaries and the Phnom Penh dynasty started a war, this country would definitely be restless. Since Yang Chendong was personally involved, how could the battle array be too small? Otherwise, it would not match his status. In fact, the commander that he left behind in Siam was one of the two heads of Yang Xie's military, the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, Leng Song. Wulonggu was also known as Wulongthani City. It was one of the biggest cities in the north of Siam. At the same time, it was also the rear of Gordon's 100,000 soldiers. It was used to provide military supplies and for emergency use. However, there were only 50,000 soldiers here. 500 of them were sent to capture the Han civilians. At this moment, such a large city was secretly surrounded by the mercenaries led by Commander Leng Song. 20 days ago, Leng Song was ordered by Yang Chendong to secretly enter the country with the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division and 8 auxiliary battalions. They hid in the dense forest. They even saw with their own eyes that Gordon led 100,000 soldiers out of Wulonggu City and headed straight for Wanshang City. At that time, they could have set up an ambush. However, Leng Song did not do so. After that, they saw the 50,000 soldiers out of the city. However, they still did not make a move. In Yang Chendong's words, now was not the time to start a full-scale war with Siam. If they took the initiative to attack, it would be unjustifiable. Their military strength was limited. This was the shortcoming of the mercenaries. In a war where they could not win, such a war was not worth the effort. After seeing another 50,000 soldiers pass by, Leng Song immediately carried out the military operation plan formulated by the 6th young master. He started to plan for Wulonggu City. The plan was divided into 3 parts. First, secretly enter Wulonggu City and attack them from the inside. Second, severely injure the 50,000 soldiers of Siam and burn their military supplies and provisions. They would have no choice but to return. Third, when Gordon returned, the mercenaries would give up on Wulonggu City and ambush them. They would try their best to eliminate their forces so that they would not have the energy to invade Wanshang City. As long as these 3 points were achieved, Yang Chendong would have enough time to settle the matter of the Phnom Penh dynasty and reach the final conclusion of the peace talks. Yes, this time Yang Chendong did not intend to swallow the Phnom Penh dynasty. He did not have such a big appetite. He had not even occupied Vietnam and Laos for a long time. The internal affairs had not been settled yet. How could he take over the Phnom Penh dynasty? If he really did that, there would not be enough manpower to protect and manage the place. It would only benefit other countries. Yang Chendong would not do such a loss-making deal. Leng Song quietly left Chichen City. Although he was the commander of a division and the only division commander in the army, he would be credited for any results that the Leng vanguard achieved on the front line. However, how could the fruits of victory be better than the fruits of victory obtained by himself? This time, Yang Chen finally transferred him out and gave him great expectations. Leng Song held his breath in his heart. Not only did he have to complete the task, but he also had to complete the task at the smallest cost. He had to show the heads of his subordinates that he didn't rely on his seniority, but he had the real ability. He had great ambitions and was especially attentive in executing the 6th young master's military plan. He first sent people to disguise themselves as the Phnom Penh dynasty's caravan and entered Wulong City. In order not to attract attention, the Leng vanguard entered the city in groups of 3 to 5 people and kept a low profile. They entered different inns in the city like a drop of water thrown into a river. No one would have thought that the enemy would suddenly appear behind them. In addition, there was only 1 battalion of the Leng vanguard that entered the city. The 400 people were divided into many groups and entered the city separately. For a city with a population of 100,000 people and 50,000 soldiers, this number of people was really nothing. They did not reveal themselves. A battalion of the Leng vanguard entered the city, indicating that the first step of the plan was successful. After the news of Gordon attacking Wanshang City came, they had an excuse to start the war. Now, they would fight in self-defense. Leng Song arranged for his scouts to enter the city and contact the Leng vanguard warriors. They decided to attack Wulong City tonight. The battalion commander of the 1st Regiment's 3rd Battalion, Xiao Yining, entered the city. This person had displayed astonishing leadership skills in the process of reclaiming and pacifying Wuxia Island. In addition, he was qualified. Thus, he naturally became the 3rd Battalion commander of the 1st Regiment. Many people were envious that he could enter the 1st Regiment and become a battalion commander of the Leng Vanguard Battalion. But to him, this was nothing. His goal in life was not limited to being a battalion commander. In his opinion, he should at least be a division commander. Only then would it be awe-inspiring, and be considered a true glory. There was no need to doubt the ability of a person with such ambitions. After secretly meeting with the scouts in the city and receiving the new military order, Xiao Yining began to run around, quickly contacting all his subordinates. They agreed that they would act in the middle of the night to take down Wulong City Gate and lead the main army into the city. Compared to the flames of war on the front lines, there were soldiers and horses. Wulong City, which was at the rear, could be said to be peaceful and prosperous. They were also fighting with mercenaries. As the main attacker, there was naturally no pressure. Furthermore, Siam's military strength had always been at the top of the nearby countries. This made them think that they were saints and everyone else was mortals. With such an arrogant mentality and the stimulation of the 50,000 Siam soldiers entering the city, the entire Wulong City fell into a false state of prosperity. With a large population, it was naturally easy to do all kinds of business. For example, the restaurants, casinos, and especially the brothels in the city were filled with people and were extremely lively. Even if the front lines reported that the attack was not going well, it did not seem to affect them much. They could do whatever they wanted and enjoy themselves as much as they wanted. Of course, they did not do nothing. For example, after receiving General Gordon's orders, they sent out 50,000 soldiers to capture the Han people in other cities and towns. Chapter 618. Just like how Yang Qindong would think that those who were not of the same race were not of the same race. The people of Siam also had the same thought. No matter how many years these Han people had lived in their country, as long as they were Han people or their descendants, they were not to be trusted. Their status was also the lowest. Now that they had to capture these people, the soldiers sent out to carry out this mission did not feel any burden at all. It was as if it was only right to treat the Han people however they wanted. The soldiers swaggered through the streets and left. Naturally, their mission was leaked. When Xiao Yining heard that the enemy troops were going to capture Han people, he sensed that something was wrong. This made him even more determined to take action tonight. When the news reached the ears of the other Leng Feng soldiers, they were enraged. They could not wait to destroy Wulong City and disrupt the enemy's plan. Amidst the torment, night finally arrived. The sky was getting darker and darker. When the watches of the soldiers of the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Front Battalion showed 11:00 at night, they began to walk out of the inns. Then, like ghosts in the night, they split into dozens of groups and slowly and carefully moved toward the southern gate of Wulong City. The Siamese soldiers were too careless. They did not expect the enemy to infiltrate their rear. The soldiers guarding the gate were completely unprepared. Originally, there were 1,000 soldiers guarding the gate. However, there were less than 300 soldiers left. The other 700 soldiers had applied for leave to play in the city. Arrogance were bad habits that should not exist in an army. If an army had these habits, it could only be said that they were not far from being destroyed. When Xiao Yining led the 400 Leng Feng soldiers to the south gate, he saw the enemy's morale was low. Wait a minute, something is not right. Seeing that there were only about 300 enemies in front of him, Xiao Yining instinctively stopped moving forward. He led the soldiers to hide in the shadows. Go, find the brothers who stayed here. Without Xiao Yining's order, the Leng Feng soldiers who stayed here to observe the situation found him first. They then explained the situation to him. Battalion commander, the enemy did not notice us. There should be 1,000 soldiers here, but most of them applied for leave to play in the city. Even the Chiliarch left. Is that so? Xiao Yining was shocked when he heard this. He didn't dare to think that something like this could happen. If something similar happened in Lengfeng, everyone from the highest officer to the lowest squad leader would be punished. They would be given demerits, and it was even possible that they would be expelled from the military. Needless to say, the Siamese soldiers were truly blessed. Of course, some happiness came at a heavy price, such as one's life. Good, it's good that the enemy is not prepared. This is our chance. The Xiao family wanted to laugh out loud. They looked at the watch on their wrist. It was 11:45. There was still a quarter of an hour left. With Leng Feng's ability, he had more than enough time to prepare. Inform everyone to begin the operation. No one is to make a sound, and no one is to fire. Turn off the safety. I will punish whoever drops the ball later. The Xiao family's expression was stern as they issued the military order in a cold voice. Leng Feng and his brothers, who had been impatient for a long time, quickly formed groups of 3 and crept towards the 300 enemies that were still illuminated by the torches. Even though there were only 300 people left, they were obviously distracted. They were either leaning against the wall, half squatting on the ground, or leaning against each other. They were all resting with their eyes closed. Perhaps, in their subconscious, they didn't even think about the danger they would face if they stayed here. Without the slightest bit of alertness, Leng Feng's mission was very easy. They only needed to keep an eye on the target, walk behind or beside the target, and then cover the target's mouth with their large hands. Their left hand, which held a military knife, gently cut forward. Bright red blood spurted out, and a life was lost. The eyes closed forever, and there was no longer any breath. Perhaps some of the Siamese soldiers struggled before they died, but under Leng Feng's large hands, their struggles and resistance were futile. They only sped up their blood flow, but it didn't change the situation at all. Outside the torches, the Siamese soldiers were silently slaughtered one after another. In just 5 minutes, more than 100 enemies outside the perimeter were all killed. There was no sound or movement from the beginning to the end. This was the strength of the Leng Feng, and it was the result of their training. It was another kind of report. After the enemies outside the perimeter were all killed, the next target was the 100 enemies under the torches at the city gate. It was unrealistic to try and assassinate them one by one, but Xiao Yining wasn't afraid. He waved his hand, and a portion of the 1st Company and 2nd Company of the 3rd Battalion quickly approached the city gate with him. They moved cautiously, and even though it was only a distance of 100 meters, it actually took them more than 5 minutes to walk. During this time, the 100 people didn't make any noise other than the sound of their breathing. Finally, they approached the south gate. Xiao Yining was the first to pounce forward like a tiger. Within a breath, more than 100 Leng Feng did the same. Puff, 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 the military knives silently pierced the chests of the Siamese soldiers. The intense pain immediately woke them up. Some of them even wanted to scream before they died, but when a large hand appeared in front of their eyes and reached their mouths, everything was over. A total of 300 enemies, except for one Siamese soldier who was stabbed in the wrong spot and died after a scream. The other 299 people didn't have the chance to make a sound. Xiao Yining stared at the Leng Feng who made a mistake. Fortunately, there were no more enemies at the south gate. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. Open the gate, send the signal, and lead the army into the city. Xiao Yining immediately stopped and ordered. There were only 2 minutes left until midnight. Outside the south gate, Leng Song led the 1st and 2nd Battalions and 8 auxiliary battalions of the 1st Battalion to wait. Everyone's eyes were resolute as they stared straight ahead. They didn't even blink for a long time. Commander, there are only 2 minutes left. Will Battalion Commander Xiao and his men encounter any problems? Political Commissar Mo Qingyu asked worriedly. Commander, why don't I lead my men up the tower? I don't mean to brag, but this tower is only a dozen meters tall. My men and I will only need a minute to climb it. 2nd Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang sounded more anxious as he spoke in a hoarse voice. Don't we still have 2 minutes? let's wait a little longer. We have to have faith in Battalion Commander Xiao, Leng Song said calmly. How could he not know the capabilities of his own battalion commander and Leng Feng? Even if there was an accident, he should have heard gunshots. However, there was no movement, so why was he so anxious? As soon as Leng Song finished speaking, the south gate 400 meters away slowly opened from the inside. A bright torch appeared and flickered 3 times to the left and 3 times to the right. We did it. Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang couldn't help but laugh excitedly. He could finally enter the city and start a massacre. During this period of time, the 1st Regiment had been carrying out missions in Crimson City, dealing with the captives and other matters that were sent to the island. He was already tired of it and couldn't wait to show off his skills on the battlefield. Now, the opportunity had finally presented itself. That's our secret signal. Advance. Leng Song carefully looked through the night vision binoculars. After confirming that it was Xiao Yining's secret signal, he gave the order. Then, the 4,000 mercenaries stood up from the ground and crazily rushed forward. In front of the south gate, the city gate had been completely opened, allowing the mercenaries to rush in. Leng Song appeared in front of Xiao Yining along with the army. Battalion Commander Xiao, you've worked hard. How's the situation? Commander, the south gate has been controlled. The enemies in the city have no other defenses. Xiao Yining gave a standard military salute and replied. Very good. Leng Song nodded approvingly. This result was better than he expected. Originally, he thought that with 400 mercenaries against 1,000, they would have to make some noise. That way, the city gate could be opened, but the enemy would be alerted and counterattack. But now, the city gate was occupied, and the enemy was kept in the dark. This way, they had more time to set up their plans. Since the enemy hasn't noticed, we can't follow the first plan. Let's go with the second plan. Leng Song said in high spirits. The second plan was to enter the city without alerting the enemy. Then, with the Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion as one unit, they would march separately. This way, his troops would be divided into 21 units. If they appeared in various parts of the city and fought at night, it would give the enemy the impression that they were everywhere. With more than 4,000 men, they would be able to unleash 10 times the power. It would be more effective in conquering and destroying Wulong City. Fortunately, Leng Song had prepared the second plan. Although at that time, he didn't think it would work. However, due to the carelessness of the Siamese soldiers and the perfect performance of Xiao Yining's 3 battalions, the second plan could be implemented. Suppressing his excitement, Leng Song gathered the 13 company commanders of Leng Feng and the 8 battalion commanders of Leng Feng. Follow Plan 2. Get to the designated location as fast as you can. Remember, try not to make any noise before you get there. Even if you accidentally encounter an enemy, it's best if you can deal with them without making a sound. When it's 1 o'clock, everyone will attack with all their might. Understood? Chapter 619. Leng Song held a map of Wulong City that he had prepared a long time ago and spoke to his subordinates. Familiarize yourself with your destination. If you don't understand, come and ask me. Now, I will give you 5 minutes to prepare and assemble your troops before we depart. Before they came, the officers had already imprinted the first and second plans in their minds. How could anyone not be familiar with them now? Therefore, after nodding their heads, they went to gather their troops and instructed them to not make any noise as much as possible and to arrive at the designated location as quietly as possible. If they wanted to kill the enemy, they would start from one point and kill as much as they wanted. 5 minutes later, the unit furthest away from their destination set off. Then, the second unit, the third unit. Soon, Leng Song and Political Commissar Mo Qingyu also disappeared from the south gate. In less than 10 minutes, everything returned to normal. Only the night breeze could be heard. At this time, Wulong City was shrouded in darkness and silence. It was already past 12 o'clock. Those who wanted to sleep had already gone to sleep. Those who wanted to play had already found a place to bury their souls. Everything seemed to be the same as usual, until the sound of swords clashing could be heard on the street, breaking the silence of the street. They were the 100 soldiers guarding the south gate. Because they had lost all their money in gambling, they had no choice but to leave early. Unfortunately, they bumped into a group of mercenaries who were rushing towards their destination on the street. The two sides suddenly met on the street. On one side, there were 100 gamblers who had lost all their money. On the other side, there were 400 auxiliary soldiers. After the two sides looked at each other, a short battle began. The 100 Siamese soldiers who did not bring any weapons were the ones being slaughtered. However, they still screamed before they died. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In the silence of the night, the screams spread far and wide. It also attracted the attention of the nearby residents. The commotion was getting louder and louder. Battalion commander, what should we do? A company commander stabbed the last Siamese soldier to death on the ground with a bayonet. He turned around and asked the battalion commander. Don't think too much about it. Go to the rendezvous point as fast as you can. The auxiliary battalion commander secretly cursed his bad luck, but he didn't panic. This was just a warm-up before the big battle. The team of 400 people quickly left. When the people nearby came out to take a look, they saw the ground full of corpses and the smell of blood. Ah! Someone screamed first. Then, similar screams came one after another. The commotion spread far and wide. Finally, the people on the other side of the street were alerted. Then, the Siamese soldiers in the city also received the news. The hour hand was approaching 12:50. There were still 10 minutes before the general attack. Except for a few small teams that were further away from the destination, most of the soldiers had already arrived at the designated location. However, the streets were already bustling with activity. The death of more than 100 Siamese soldiers was definitely a big case, and it attracted the attention of many people. Many Siamese captains, chiliarchs, and centurions who received the news were rushing over with their men. Even at this moment, they still didn't think that they were in danger. They just thought that some fugitive and his subordinates had bumped into each other and got into a fight. The hour hand kept moving. Finally, it pointed to the final destination, 1:00 in the morning. Send the signal. Attack! Commander Lang Song's voice trembled. He was excited. As soon as he finished speaking, a bright red signal flare rose into the sky and lit up the sky. Following which, gunshots and grenades rang out all over the city. The all-out attack had begun. At this moment, Wulong City had turned into a city of fire. Flames shot out in all directions, incessant and endless. The power of the Type 95 and the Type 81 assault rifle formed an impenetrable fire net. All the Siamese soldiers in front of them became live targets. Whenever the soldiers gathered together to form a dense charge, a series of grenades would end their lives. Their bodies were thrown high into the air before they fell heavily to the ground. Any Siamese who walked on the streets, whether they were generals or soldiers, armed or ordinary civilians, became targets for the mercenaries. They were like food in the eyes of a beast. They were constantly bitten and devoured. They died or were injured. There were gunshots everywhere and enemies were everywhere. It gave people a feeling that there was nowhere to hide and nowhere to hide. It seemed that at this moment, no place was safe. No place was heaven. Charge. Charge out. Report this to General Gordon. We must charge out. The 5 captains of the Siamese army in the city shouted at the top of their lungs. It seemed that if they didn't do this, they would lose all hope. Retreat. Retreat to the south gate. After an hour of continuous gunshots, the Siamese soldiers gradually came to their senses. After a few consecutive charges and countless deaths, they finally understood how terrifying their opponents were. At this moment, no one was thinking about fighting with the enemy who had entered the city. They only had one thought in their minds, and that was to retreat. They had to escape and leave this hell on earth. Gunshots were heard intermittently throughout the night. When the sky finally brightened, the streets were littered with corpses. From time to time, among the crowds, there were survivors who were injured and wailing. Many places in the city were on fire. The places where food and weapons were stored were severely damaged. Even when the sky brightened, the fire showed no signs of stopping. It was still burning fiercely. The mercenaries had retreated, leaving behind a city full of corpses and injured soldiers. According to the statistics, more than 60,000 soldiers and civilians of Siam were killed or injured in this battle. At least half of them were burned by the fire and trampled to death. In fact, only about 10,000 people died in the hands of the mercenaries. The warehouse was burned. Apart from the corpses and the injured soldiers who could not be moved, there was no one left in the city. The scariest thing about this battle was that they didn't know who did it, and they didn't know how many enemies there were. They only knew from the survivors' descriptions that there should be a lot of enemies, and they seemed to be everywhere. Moreover, they all had very powerful rifles in their hands, and they even suspected that the other side had cannons. Otherwise, why would there be the sound of explosions from time to time? It was unknown whether outsiders believed in such a statement, but the people living in Wulong City firmly believed in it. Because on this night, at least half of the 100,000 people were affected. Their families and friends were either killed or injured. Out of the 50,000 Siamese soldiers, more than 10,000 were killed and 10,000 were injured. The remaining 30,000 soldiers were lucky enough to escape. They did not dare to stay in the vicinity. Instead, they went straight to Kongjing City, which was south of Wulong City. From afar, the 30,000 soldiers looked like a group of homeless people. They wore tattered uniforms, their eyes were lifeless, and their morale was low. Most of them did not even know where their weapons were when they escaped. At this moment, who would dare to believe that this was an army with level 3 combat power? Were they supposed to be the elite soldiers of Siam? In a dense forest about 10 miles south of Wulong City, Leng Song was leading his army to reorganize themselves. After a night of battle, they had achieved their goal. Especially after burning the enemy's military supplies and provisions, General Gordon had no choice but to retreat. How is it? How is the count of the casualties? Although Leng Song also felt a little tired, as a commander, he naturally couldn't just fall asleep like ordinary soldiers. There was still too much work for him to do. He needed to preside over and make decisions. Commander, Leng Fong has returned. There are only 2 injured soldiers. However, it is not a big problem. They just need to rest for a while to recover their combat power. 7 auxiliary soldiers died and 200 were injured. 3 of them were seriously injured. The rest only had light injuries. The political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Mo Qingyu, looked at the statistics of the battalions and reported to Leng Song. Good. Arrange for a platoon of auxiliary soldiers to send the 3 seriously injured soldiers away. The rest of you should take the time to rest. In the afternoon, dig out the ammunition buried in the forest. Replenish them and be ready for battle. Hearing that Leng Fong did not suffer any losses and only lost a few auxiliary soldiers, Leng Song felt some heartache. However, overall, he was satisfied with the results. Leng Fong was indeed Leng Fong. Not only was he good at killing the enemy, he was also good at protecting himself on the battlefield. Especially when it came to city warfare in the middle of the night. Who knows how many times they had practiced it. Their hard work had finally paid off. As the commander, Leng Song was also proud of it. Immediately report to the 6th young master about our results. Also, tell him that we are not going to go deeper into Siam. We are going to stay here and ambush Gudan. Last night's battle at Wulong City went too smoothly. Leng Song's side did not suffer any losses and they were able to safely retreat from the city. This gave Leng Song a lot of confidence in the upcoming battle plan. Since he was leading the 1st Regiment of Leng Fong and 8 auxiliary battalions, they should be the main force. Wherever they go, they should be able to kill the enemy until they can't find their way north. As the saying goes, it is better to break one finger than to injure all 10. Leng Song decided to show Gudan his power. It would be best if he could kill this person. If he could not kill him, he would at least severely injure him. This way, when Gudan thought about hiring mercenaries in the future, he would tremble without a fight. After the telegram was sent out, Yang Chendong, who was in Phnom Penh dynasty, received the report. He immediately gave orders and agreed to Leng Song's request for battle. However, he also gave his own suggestion. If they could fight, then they should fight. If they could not fight, then they should not force themselves. It was more important to preserve their own strength. Chapter 620. Below Wanxiang City, there was a short period of peace after the battle. The power of the landmines had frightened General Gordon. He was not prepared to launch any more attacks before the Han civilians from the rear were sent up. Since he was the one attacking the city, he had the initiative. Furthermore, Wulong City had already prepared food for the army. There would not be any problems defending the city for a few months. Since there was no need to go to war for the time being, General Gordon summoned the singers who followed the army and held a party in his tent. He also called his generals and General Fan Yuhai to enjoy the joy of the interlude between wars. 8 young women with great figures were dressed in faintly discernible gauze. Their waists were swaying in the tent. Gordon and the other generals sat around them and laughed from time to time. Their gazes followed the movements of the women as they enjoyed the feast that was brought to their eyes. Gordon, who was sitting at the front, had already set his goal of warming the bed tonight. He wanted to fight for 300 rounds to get rid of the bad luck on his body. Just as he was indulging in his fantasies, a bodyguard quietly entered the tent with an ugly expression. He walked to his ear and whispered in a low voice. "What?" Suddenly, Gordon's face turned red, and the wine cup in his hand flew out with a bang. This movement attracted the attention of the other generals, and the 8 women screamed in shock. "Scream, scream, what are you screaming for? Get out of here." Gordon waved his hand. At this moment, his eyes were filled with a strong murderous aura. It was as if he would kill anyone who dared to appear in front of him and offend him. The 8 singers hurriedly left the tent, leaving behind only a few generals in the tent. Fan Yuhai raised his eyebrows and then frowned deeply. He had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. "General, what happened?" A captain who was Gordon's absolute confidant asked in confusion. "Something happened. Wulong City was invaded last night. Our 50,000-strong army was defeated and was forced to retreat to the south. Our rations and weapons in the city were all burned. Damn it." First, he used a calm voice to report what he had just heard. Then, killing intent burst out from his eyes. It was as though he wanted to materialize a saber light to kill someone. There was silence in the tent as everyone digested Gordon's words. However, very soon, a general said in disbelief, "That's impossible. We are right here. The 4 gates of Wanxiang City are tightly shut. It's impossible for them to send an army to surround us." "That's right. The Lao's army won't go around us. The armies of other countries are all our allies. They won't attack us secretly. Could it be the work of mercenaries? But how did they get behind us? Could it be that they fell from the sky?" "We launched the first attack 2 days ago, and those people took action at night. That's too fast. Even if they are mercenaries, it's impossible for them to send out their troops in such a short time. They must have bypassed us to attack. There are 50,000 of our soldiers in the city. Even if they are mercenaries, they won't be able to occupy the entire Wulong City if they don't have enough soldiers. It's even more impossible for them to inflict heavy damage on our army. Could it be the work of other countries?" The generals below spoke one after another. They mentioned various possibilities, but they were all rejected one by one. Gordon's face darkened. He didn't speak. According to the battle report, the people who came were armed with advanced firearms, so they should be mercenaries. However, the battle report didn't mention the number of soldiers. What did that mean? Did they forget to mention it? That was impossible. There could only be one answer. They still didn't know how many enemies there were. Half of the 50,000-strong army was blasted out of Wulong City. They didn't even know how many enemies there were. How terrifying was that? Didn't that mean that the enemy had a lot of soldiers? However, wasn't the main force of the mercenaries taken away by the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty to attack the Phnom Penh dynasty? Where did the enemy come from? Gordon was deep in thought. The generals were also deep in thought. Even Fan Yuhai was deep in thought. The only difference was that Fan Yuhai had locked the enemy on the mercenaries even though he didn't get any accurate information. In his eyes, he was very clear about the military strength of the surrounding countries. Only the mercenaries could break into the city and defeat the 50,000-strong Siamese soldiers in one night. However, how did they appear there? After all, they had only appeared at Wanxiang City 2 days ago and launched their first attack. How could the mercenaries react so quickly? The entire battle took less than 5 days. Even a flying man couldn't have done it. Unless, when he thought of the only possibility, Fan Yuhai's expression changed drastically. Could it be that the mercenaries were already prepared and knew that they would attack Wanxiang City? Hence, they planted a large number of soldiers behind them. If that was the case, once the Siamese army launched their attack, the mercenaries started their attack on Wulong City? Yes, that must be it. If all of this was true, the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty was too good at scheming. His attacks were ruthless and the military strength behind him was much stronger than what was shown. He even had the ability to split his troops to attack Siamese and the Phnom Penh dynasty. No. It should be more than that. Since he had arranged a backup plan in Siamese, his other ally, the Kingdom of Ava, must have also arranged a backup plan. Hiss. Fan Yuhai sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly felt that Yang Chendong was very terrifying. This person was not only good at calculation, but also had a more outstanding military vision than ordinary people. He also had powerful firearms and an unknown military strength. How could such an opponent be defeated? Question marks flashed in his mind. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly had an idea. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. He had repeatedly challenged the mercenaries and Yang Chendong. First, he led the Lansang kingdom into the whirlpool of war. Then, the Lansang kingdom was destroyed. Then, he had the idea of forming an alliance between the three countries. However, now that the Phnom Penh dynasty and Siamese kingdom had been attacked to different degrees, as the initiator, how could he not be targeted by Yang Chendong? If Yang Chendong really wanted to deal with him, would he be able to stay safe with his 5,000 elite cavalry? No, such a person was too dangerous. He had to leave this place first. At least before he had enough strength, he would not appear in front of Yang Chendong. When he appeared again, he had to make all the necessary preparations. After making up his mind, Fan Yuhai did not speak anymore. He did not even have the intention to help General Gordon analyze the situation. He kept his mouth shut. General, I don't think it's the time to talk about this. Even if Wulong City's provisions have been burned, we have to be prepared to leave this place. Otherwise, if the enemy behind us and the enemy in Wanxiang City attack us from both sides, how are we going to face them? Besides, if the army loses its provisions, it will definitely cause chaos. We have to leave this place quickly while the soldiers below are still unaware. We have to gather new provisions for the next battle. One of the generals said after analyzing the gains and losses. The other generals nodded in agreement. That's right, General. We have to retreat. Yes, we have to leave. We can't let them attack us from both sides. Gordon slammed the table and said. Then, he looked around and fixed his gaze on Fan Yuhai. General Fan, what do you think? Fan Yuhai wanted to say, if we leave now, aren't you afraid that the mercenaries will attack us halfway? However, he thought that if he reminded Gordon, he would definitely hold his ground. Who knew what the mercenaries would do? If they were really attacked from both sides, wouldn't it be very dangerous for him and Gordon to stay together? Since that was the case, it was better to let them leave. At that time, whether or not they were attacked by the mercenaries, they would escape halfway. At least he would be safe. The world was big, but he was the most important. Fan Yuhai nodded. It's time to leave. How about this? I will bring my 5,000 cavalrymen and retreat last, just in case. Sigh, speaking of which, my cavalrymen were not of much use in this siege. I feel ashamed. He wanted to hear Fan Yuhai's opinion, but he did not expect him to take the initiative to bring up the rear. This made Gordon's eyes brighten. He sighed and said, General Fan is a righteous man. Thank you for your hard work. Don't worry, if the mercenaries catch up from behind, you only have to hold them off for a while. I will send reinforcements to support you. Okay, thank you. Fan Yuhai stood up and cupped his fist with a sincere face. However, he thought coldly in his heart, who would believe that you would come to my aid when I am attacked? With someone bringing up the rear, it was much easier to retreat. In order to prevent any accidents from happening, Gordon decided on the spot to retreat now. They would rush through the night and try to reach Wulong City the day after tomorrow. At that time, they would guard the city tightly and ask the king for rations so that they could regroup and fight again. With all the generals present, there was no need for a meeting. Soon, the order was given and the generals went to prepare. After 2 hours, the army had already packed up their tents and started to retreat towards Wulong City. Then, the rest of the army followed suit and left Wanshang City in a long line. On the tower in the south of Wanshang City, General He Guang was looking at the scene before him through a pair of binoculars. Because of the landmines, Wan Shaochen did not stay on the tower. There were too many things in the city that he needed to deal with, so he left everything here to He Guang. Because of this, he was also confused when he saw that the enemy had actually started to retreat. Chapter 621. He raised his binoculars again and again to make sure that he was not mistaken. The enemy had indeed retreated. He quickly said to the messenger beside him, Go and inform Governor Wan that the situation has changed. Ask him to come here as soon as possible. Half an hour later, Wan Shaochen arrived at the gate tower on his bicycle. When he arrived at the gate tower, he listened to He Guang's report and raised his binoculars as well. He saw the Siamese army retreating. How long have they been doing this? Wan Shaochen put down his binoculars and was puzzled. Reporting to the governor, they have been retreating since half an hour ago. I have calculated that the number of retreating soldiers has exceeded 10,000, and it seems like they will continue to retreat, He Guang reported with a face full of doubts. So, they have really retreated? But why? Wan Shaochen could not figure it out and frowned. I don't know, He Guang answered honestly. He wanted to ask Governor Wan why. He Guang knew that it would be useless to ask He Guang. He thought for a moment and said to the messenger beside him, Turn on the radio immediately and contact the 6th young master. Report the situation here as it is. The waiting time was always long. On the open land 5 miles away from the gate tower, the Siamese army was still retreating. Just from the looks of it, they should be serious. However, this was even more puzzling. The attack was only temporarily blocked, and only a few thousand of the 100,000 soldiers died. Why did they stop fighting? The morale of this army was too low. Sir, the 6th young master has called back. The messenger ran all the way to Wan Shaochen and handed him a telegram. Wan Shaochen, who was puzzled, quickly picked up the telegram. After a few glances, he could not help but shout excitedly, Good, good, ha ha ha. He Guang, who was beside him, was even more confused. Governor Wan, what did the 6th young master say? Here, take a look at it yourself. Wan Shaochen was in a good mood at that moment, so he casually handed the telegram to He Guang. After reading it once, her eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't help but read it again. Then, with a surprised look on her face, she said, the sixth young master said that the mercenaries attacked Wulong City and defeated the 50,000 Siamese soldiers there. They even burned the enemy's provisions? This is too powerful, but where did the mercenaries come from? Yuan Shaoqian also couldn't figure it out, but he wouldn't show it in front of his subordinates. As a superior, it was appropriate for him to remain mysterious in front of his subordinates. Thus, he chuckled and said, "This is not something you should consider. You only need to know that Wanxiang City is safe." Yes. He Guang also knew that he couldn't be fully trusted by the mercenaries right now. There were some things that he couldn't ask casually. However, now that Wanxiang City was safe and the Siamese soldiers were retreating, he was wondering if he could take advantage of the situation. Thus, he told Yuan Shaoqian his thoughts. When he heard He Guang say that he wanted to go out and fight a drowning dog, Yuan Shaoqian thought for a while and shook his head. "We have too few soldiers. If we go out, it will be dangerous. If the enemy counterattacks, the consequences will be unimaginable. It's better not to take the risk." There was only one company of soldiers guarding the city, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Laotian mercenaries. If they really went out, only the auxiliary soldiers of the Leng vanguard would be able to take advantage of the situation. However, their numbers were too small. Instead of taking the risk and reaping huge rewards, it was better to stay put. After all, there would be more battles in the future. These were the words of an experienced strategist. Yuan Shaoqian made this decision because the number of soldiers he had was limited. They could defend the city, but it wasn't enough to go out and kill the enemy. Secondly, the sixth young master's telegram didn't ask them to attack. Thus, the sixth young master probably meant the same thing. Thus, they watched as the Siamese army left. Of course, there was an even more important reason. Defending Wanxiang City was a mission in the first place, and it was enough as long as he could complete this mission. What he had was only a standing army, and not an invincible main force. 5 miles away from the city, the Siamese military camp set off. Fan Yuhai and his 5,000 cavalrymen had already gathered at a spot and were watching the scene unfold with indifference. If one took a closer look, they would realize that they had already prepared everything. Once something unexpected happened, not only would they not cover the retreat, but they would also rush out at the first moment and escape without a trace. That was the truth. Fan Yuhai might have said that he would bring up the rear, but once Wanxiang City's city gates opened, he would definitely be the first to escape with the cavalry. After all, they were faster on horseback than the foot soldiers. Fan Yuhai's nerves were stretched taut. When the sky turned dark, all the Siamese army had retreated. However, there was still no movement from Wanxiang City. This made Fan Yuhai heave a sigh of relief. "All right, now that everything is fine, we should leave." Fan Yuhai seemed to be talking to himself. Then, he scanned his surroundings for a moment. He knew that after leaving this time, he didn't know when he would return. Perhaps, he would never return. The Siamese army left Wanxiang City in a long line. Close to 100,000 soldiers formed a formation that spanned more than 10 miles. When the sky turned dark, they lit up their torches. From afar, it was even more spectacular. On the way back to Wulong, the mercenaries led by Leng Song had already set up an ambush in the dense forest on both sides of the road. Everyone had a good night's sleep during the day. Now, everyone was full of energy. They held on to their steel spears and stared at the retreating Siamese army with sparkling eyes. Gordon was quite capable. Although they were retreating, they didn't panic. The 1,000-man teams were well coordinated and didn't have any obvious weaknesses. Once one of the 1,000-man teams was attacked, the other 1,000-man teams would be able to provide support immediately. With the front and rear looking after each other, they would be able to minimize the losses. An ordinary army would be helpless against such a formation. However, it was a pity that they were facing a mercenary army. Furthermore, the mercenary army was prepared and had won the battle. Therefore, they were at a disadvantage in terms of morale and preparation. What was the purpose of ancient wars? Morale and preparation naturally played a very important role. Currently, the mercenaries had the advantage in these aspects. They had already won half the battle even before the battle started. Furthermore, night battles were their forte. It would be difficult for them to not win this battle. The only thing that mattered was how much they could achieve in this battle. Leng Song seemed to have known that the Siamese army would retreat in an orderly manner. As the commander, he had already come up with a countermeasure. That was to split up the troops. Didn't you have the front and rear looking after each other? Didn't you attack a location and the nearby troops would be able to provide support? Good. What would you do if I suddenly attacked and dealt you a huge blow? Could you really have the front and rear looking after each other? Hence, in the dense forest by the road, the 8 auxiliary battalions were divided into companies. This resulted in 32 small units that were positioned at different locations for the ambush. The 3 cold vanguard battalions of the 1st Regiment became the mobile troops. They would provide support wherever the battle was intense. These 3 battalions were further divided into 36 platoons. They were positioned at the surrounding areas of the auxiliary troops. This was to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Just as the mercenary army was about to set up the ambush, the enemy finally appeared. According to the previous plan, the mercenary army did not attack immediately. Instead, they allowed the enemy's vanguard to pass by. Once the enemy's main force entered the area, it would be time for the mercenary army to attack. In the dense forest area, the most unbearable thing for people were the mosquitoes in the forest. Not only were there a lot of them, but they were also large and carried a weak poison. Once bitten, it wouldn't take long for a big blister to form, making it extremely itchy. In such an environment, ambushing and staying here for a long time was a test of one's willpower. Speaking of which, these mosquitoes would not consider whether or not they would bite you just because of your skin color or your intentions. As long as you had flesh and blood, even if you were a wild beast, you would be a delicious meal in their eyes. After ambushing here for more than 2 hours, all of the mercenaries' faces were covered with all kinds of large swollen bumps. If they had not worn gloves in advance, their hands would have been covered with bumps. This would have greatly affected their accuracy. Endure it, endure it. The same firm voice echoed in every mercenary's heart. The Cold Vanguard Battalion did not want to be looked down upon by the auxiliary troops. They had to endure it. Besides, they had undergone similar training countless times. Even though their faces were itchy, it was not that they could not endure it. It was just that it was a test of willpower. The auxiliary troops were also enduring it. They wanted to perform better so that they could join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. Before the battle, Commander Leng Song had said that after this battle, those who performed well would have a chance to join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. Even the 6th young master had agreed to this. The political department was already prepared to vet them. This was a chance to join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. This was the wish of almost all the auxiliary troops. In order to achieve this goal, in order to return home in glory, in order to prove that they were the strongest young men, what was a mosquito bite? They just had to endure it and endure it. As mentioned earlier, mosquitoes would not target a single person. While the mercenaries were enduring the inhumane bites, the Siamese soldiers who were walking on the road beside the forest were also suffering from the same bites. The only difference was that the further one was from the forest, the lower the chance of being bitten. Oh, these damn mosquitoes, they bit me. It hurts, it's so itchy. Chapter 622. That's right. I've killed 3, but it's not enough. They keep coming at me. It's so annoying. After the soldier heard his companion's complaint, not only did he agree, but he also waved the torch in his hand from time to time, as if he wanted to use this action to drive away the annoying mosquitoes. You idiots, can't you stay away from the forest? The farther you are, the safer you will be, just like me. Another soldier said proudly. Everyone noticed that the soldier was about to leave the army and walk to the other side of the road. It was far enough from the forest, so it was naturally safer. That's right. You're smart. The other soldiers immediately agreed. Then, more and more people started to leave the forest and walk to the other side of the road. The Chiliarch naturally noticed this, but he did not say anything. He was also on the other side of the road. After all, the mosquitoes would not let him go just because he was a general. They were a very fair species. The general did not reprimand them. Some timid soldiers also moved to the left side of the road, trying their best to keep a distance from the forest. It was dangerous to do so. Some people had already raised the possibility that there might be mercenaries ambushing them in the forest at night. If there were, the closer they were to the forest, the safer they would be. Once they were attacked, the closer they were, the faster they could rush to the enemy. This would ensure their safety to the greatest extent. Now, the army was walking on the left side of the road. Although it was only a dozen meters away, if a fight broke out, the dozen meters would be an uncrossable trench. At first, this idea was very popular. However, as night fell and more mosquitoes began to appear, no one said it anymore. What kind of joke was this? They were standing on the main road and were already as far away from the forest as possible. There were still so many mosquitoes. If they stayed in the forest, wouldn't they become a lump of meat? Who could withstand such a test? At least, if the Siamese soldiers thought that they could not withstand it, they would naturally think that others could not withstand it. In this way, the so-called threat in the forest seemed to be non-existent. This also made the Siamese soldiers who were walking along the edge of the forest let down their guard. They only focused on driving away mosquitoes and hurrying on with their journey. In the dense forest, Ling Song was also suffering from mosquito bites. His face was already densely packed with small bumps, and these bumps were still expanding. However, if the other soldiers could endure it, as the division commander, he had no reason not to persist. He gritted his teeth and endured it. Once there are too many mosquitoes, the repellent that the sixth young master had people make is useless. Leng Song sighed softly and stared fiercely at the enemies more than 200 meters away. He decided to kill as many enemies as he could to avenge the mosquito bites tonight. The hour hand of the watch was turning, and with this movement, the enemy's main force had finally entered the forest, and the vanguard of the rear army had also stepped in. After calculating the situation in his mind, Leng Song knew that the time to attack had come. As long as he opened fire, the smell of gunpowder would be able to drive away some of the mosquitoes, let alone during a battle. Who would think about mosquito bites? Leng Song took off a pair of black leather gloves, revealing his uninjured hands. He held a Type 95 pistol tightly, adjusted his breathing, and prepared to shoot. He could even feel the mosquitoes staring at his hands, but he did not care. His eyes were indifferent, and his face was calm. He aimed the muzzle at a captain of the Siamese army. Then, his finger gently pulled the trigger. A bullet flashed through the night like a meteor, leaving a dazzling red trail in the air. Bang! As the gunshot rang out, the enemy Chiliarch fell to the ground. If one could look closely, one would see that the bullet had pierced through his head. His eyes were wide open, and he could not be more dead. This shot was the signal to launch a general attack, and what followed was the dense sound of gunfire. The sound of gunfire seemed to be everywhere. After a wave of attack, the Siamese army lost countless bodies, and their formation was in chaos. Without any defense, and with the torches in their hands, what were they if not live targets? It was not until the second wave of gunfire rang out, and countless Siamese soldiers were killed that the smarter generals came to their senses. They shouted and threw down their torches. One by one, the torches were thrown away or extinguished, and the surroundings were plunged into darkness. The gunfire was not as fierce as before, and only occasionally, it could be heard under the moonlight. The power of the flintlock had caught the Siamese soldiers off guard, and it also destroyed their pride. Many of them lay on the ground and did not dare to move, as if they were afraid that they would attract the attention of the mercenaries and become the next live target. Gordon was also attacked, and several of his bodyguards were killed. Under the cover of the other bodyguards, he was pressed to the ground and avoided the danger of being shot. He was protected by his bodyguards, and even if he was discovered, there would be a human shield in front of him, and he would not die. However, this was not what Gordon wanted. At this moment, his face was pale, and he did not know if it was because of the pain of being pressed down by his bodyguards, or because he was angry. The siege of Wanxiang City had failed, followed by Wulong City. Now, they were ambushed by the mercenaries, and he did not know how many of his 100,000 soldiers would be lost. As the general leading the army, he felt extremely humiliated. If both sides were to fight fair and square, he would lose because his skills were not as good as his opponent, and there would be nothing to say. However, the mercenaries were simply playing tricks on him. They were either relying on the advantage of firearms, mines, or other weapons, or ambushing him. This made him feel powerless, as if he had punched cotton with all his might. Initially, he was still proud of his long snake formation, and even thought that it would be best if the mercenaries appeared. This way, he would be able to counterattack and win. However, after being ambushed, he realized how wishful his thinking was. He knew to disperse his army, but did the mercenaries not know? Now, it was not just one spot that was attacked, but the entire army. How was he going to break through? The surroundings were pitch black, and all the torches were extinguished. Regardless of whether they were attacked or not, all of the 1,000 men soldiers were lying on the ground. It was as if this was the only way to ensure their safety and survive. Bastard, bastard, counterattack. What's the use of extinguishing the torches? Are you waiting for death? Although he was in a sorry state, and in order to save his life, he had to block more than one bodyguard in front of him. However, this did not stop him from reprimanding others and sending them to their deaths. Pass down my order, counterattack. There can't be too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hiding and would take advantage of the situation to charge over. Quick, counterattack. I'll kill anyone who doesn't counterattack. Gordon's yelling was heard in the darkness. His yelling was extremely clear in such a quiet atmosphere, and it made many Kiliarch's expressions turn ugly. If they attacked, they might die, but if they didn't attack, they would die too. Thinking that dying in battle would be considered a sacrifice for the country, and at least their families would be safe, some of the Kiliarchs had no choice but to yell at their subordinates. Everyone, stand up and charge forward. The enemy is in the dense forest. As long as we charge forward, they won't have any advantage in close combat. I'll kill anyone who doesn't charge. The Kiliarchs did not forget to say the last sentence. Previously, they were still cursing Gordon for bullying the weak, but now that they thought about it, wasn't it the same for them? After the generals gave their orders, the soldiers were the ones who suffered the most. They did not have the ability to bargain with the generals. Under the orders of the centurions and the supervision of the decharches and corporals, the soldiers at the lowest level were forced to stand up. Then, in groups, they began to approach the dense forest on the right side of the road. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about being bitten by mosquitoes, they would be standing at the edge of the forest right now. With a single gunshot, they would be able to rush over as quickly as possible and force the mercenaries to engage in close combat with them. But now, it was useless to say anything. In history, there was no such thing as if or if. Everything depended on strength and a trace of luck. The soldiers were forced to get up from the ground one by one and carefully walk towards the dense forest. It seemed as though there were mines buried under their feet. If they were not careful, they would be blown up into the sky by the powerful explosion. However, the attack they expected didn't happen. After walking forward for a distance of 50 meters, gunshots were still heard in front of them. It was as though everything that happened just now was a dream, an illusion. This change gave more people courage, and they stood up as well. Then, they groped their way through the darkness and headed towards the dense forest. Could it be that the enemy retreated after one wave of attacks? That must be it. Otherwise, the gunshots would have been heard long ago. It seems like there aren't too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given up such a good opportunity. If that's the case, what are you waiting for? Let's go. This is our chance to show off. The Siamese soldiers began to talk among themselves. Then, their footsteps began to quicken and become lighter. It was as if the mosquito bites were no longer happening. Bam, 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 bam. Just when the Siamese soldiers thought that they were safe, a barrage of gunshots rang out again. This time, it was as loud as the first wave of attacks. The Siamese soldiers were caught off guard, especially those who were the fastest. They were the first to die. Like harvested wheat, they fell to the ground one after another. Even when they died, their eyes were still wide open, as though they couldn't understand what had happened. Chapter 623. Get down! One of the generals shouted. Immediately, the charging Siamese soldiers fell to the ground obediently. Their movements were so fast that it was as if they had practiced this countless times. Poor General Gordon had just stood up under the protection of his bodyguards when gunshots rang out. Once again, he was mercilessly pressed to the ground. He could not help but chew on a piece of mud in his mouth, which made him angry and ashamed at the same time. The sound of gunfire continued. From time to time, figures would rush out of the forest. Then, grenades would fall on the heads of the Siamese soldiers who were close to the forest. Retreat! Retreat! Crawl backward! Following the explosions, more and more soldiers fell to the ground. Some Kiliarchs hurriedly gave out orders. Then, a shocking scene happened. On the main road, countless people were frantically retreating. With this speed, even if they were the members of Cold Vanguard, some of them would probably pass the test. This should be the effect of potential. When a person was faced with death, he could always explode with unimaginable speed. As the Siamese soldiers retreated to their original positions, the gunshots and grenade explosions gradually stopped. Silence reigned over the land once again. Being tricked once wasn't something to be afraid of. A horse could stumble. However, if he were to fall for the same trick again and suffer a loss, then he would be considered stupid and would not learn from his mistakes. Hence, after this, even when Gordon's roar came from the darkness again, none of the Kiliarchs moved. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, if no one moved, could it be that your brother, the great general, would kill all of us Kiliarchs? If he really did that, it would not be long before a mutiny broke out. After shouting so many times that his voice was almost hoarse, the army did not move at all. Gordon gave up shouting. Forget it, forget it. He would just wait like this. Once the sun rose and everyone could see their opponents clearly, it would be time for him to counterattack. He did not believe that he would lose again at that time. This scene was similar to when Chen Bo dealt with the 100,000 soldiers of the Lansang kingdom. They were also forced to lie on the ground to ensure their safety. The only difference was that the terrain this time was not good. Leng Song had limited manpower and could not capture the 100,000 soldiers again. Pass down the order. The auxiliary soldiers will retreat first. The cold front will be the last to retreat. After dawn, gather at Wanxiang City. Leng Song gave the order reluctantly. He thought that he could fight a good battle, but he was helpless against these cowards. After all, he couldn't let the army charge forward. Firstly, their line of sight would be obstructed, and secondly, their forces were too few. If they really charged forward and engaged in close combat, they would be the ones to suffer. This was an outcome that he absolutely did not want. The mercenaries began to retreat into the depths of the forest in an orderly manner. Then, they turned and headed towards Wanxiang City. The Siamese soldiers on the road did not dare to guess or test the waters. This was because it would mean sacrificing countless lives. No one wanted to die, so they might as well stay where they were. The cold wind blew past them from time to time. Mosquitoes would also take the opportunity to bite them. The Siamese soldiers could only endure and curse in their hearts. They cursed the mercenaries for targeting them. They cursed their general for being useless. What kind of war was this? Time passed slowly and the sky gradually brightened. The dew fell and the mosquitoes were also affected by it. They began to leave one by one. When the white fog dissipated, the Siamese soldiers finally launched their counterattack. They rushed into the forest as if they wanted to perform well. However, what awaited them was no one. Even the cold front, who were the last to retreat, had all retreated an hour ago. Under the protection of his bodyguards, Gordon stood up straight again. However, his eyes were red, indicating that he did not rest well last night. "General, the enemy is no longer in the forest. What should we do next?" All of the major commanders and Kiliarchs began to gather around this general before asking questions with fawning expressions on their faces. After all, they had shown their fearful side last night. Now, they were afraid that their general would settle the score with them. Gordon wanted to settle the score with them. However, if he really dealt with these generals, who would lead the army? If these generals gathered together, they might even turn against him. He could only remember this incident in his heart. He waved his hand and said impatiently, "What else can we do? Continue to retreat. Let the army speed up and rush to Wulong City for breakfast." He could not deal with these generals, but he could still do something. Punishing them for not eating breakfast was a temporary way to vent his anger. Of course, this was also because Gordon wanted to rush back to the city as soon as possible. Once he entered the city, he would be much safer. After this battle, the Siamese army lost another 10,000 soldiers. With less than 90,000 soldiers and 10,000 injured soldiers, the Siamese army finally returned to Wulong City in the evening of the next day. When he entered the city, he saw the destroyed streets and houses. There were even some fireworks that had not been completely extinguished. Gordon knew that this base was finished. It would take at least a few months to rebuild it. This meant that the plan to attack Wanxiang City would have to be abandoned halfway. He would have to return to the capital with shame. Leng Song naturally did not care about what Gordon was thinking. 2 battles, 2 victories. More than 4,000 soldiers wiped out tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. Most importantly, he did not suffer any losses. This result was satisfactory. With a face full of excitement, he arrived at Wanxiang City. Luan Shaochen had already received the news and was waiting for these heroes with a group of people. What was different from when Gudan entered Wulong City was that good wine and tea had already been prepared. Everyone had a joyful expression on their faces. Wanxiang City was safe. As the governor, Luan Shaochen was naturally the happiest person. Although he was not afraid of war, he knew that once a battle broke out, the order in the city that had just gotten back on track would be destroyed. He did not know how much he would have to pay to get back on track. Fortunately, the 6th young master had calculated everything. The retreat of the Siamese army was a reality. With the 4,000 soldiers led by Leng Song, even if the enemy attacked again, they would not have to be afraid. With the advantage of weapons, Gordon would definitely return empty-handed. After Leng Song's troops returned to the city, another piece of good news was sent over via telegram. Just yesterday, the Awol dynasty also sent out 50,000 soldiers. However, they were quickly met by the Vietnamese mercenaries Hong Jin and Ruan Jianqing's 20,000 men at the strategic town of Pangyang Valley in the northwest of Laos. There was no chance for the Awa dynasty to launch a surprise attack, so they happily withdrew their troops. Just like that, Siam and Awa's attacks were disrupted. The people of Laos finally did not have to live in fear anymore. They could continue doing what they were supposed to do. When the news of Laos reached Yang Chindong's ears, the 6th young master at Suwon City heaved a sigh of relief. Although all of this was within his expectations, no one could guarantee that there would be no accidents. Now that the dust had settled, he could finally relax and focus all his attention on Suwon City. They still haven't sent anyone to negotiate with us? Yang Chindong placed his hands on his waist and stood in front of the temporary headquarters. He looked at the tall city in the distance and asked Tiger's Mane. "Young master, not yet. There's news from the Security Bureau. Leader Yun is still in the middle of an operation. He should be here soon." Tiger's Mane reported. "Good, since that's the case, we'll increase the price. Some people just don't learn from their mistakes. Give the order, fire with all your might. I want to see how long they can hold on. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. Due to his own foundation, he did not have the intention to take down the Phnom Penh dynasty this time. The 4.5 million Han people in Suwon City were in the process of being transformed, but the news was not ideal. These people were all refugees that the Southern Ming dynasty had to abandon. They were uneducated and were born to hard labor. They were also timid, and all they wanted was to have a bite to eat and survive. For such people to change in a short period of time, to give them confidence and dignity, it was not something that could be done in a day. Although the political department and the publicity department had put in a lot of effort, it was impossible to use it without a year. In addition, they had to learn culture, at least to be able to read, which may take longer. When the two provinces of Vietnam and Laos were established, 200,000 educated youths in Suwon City had been used. To take over the entire Phnom Penh dynasty, at least 100,000 educated youths were needed. This reserve was gone, and it would take time to train them again. This was Yang Chendong's difficulty. Without enough foundation, how could he build high-rise buildings? In the end, he decided that this time, he would only fight against the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to show his muscles through this incident to ensure that no one would bully him in Vietnam or Laos when he was not here. The main reason that forced Yang Chendong to make this decision was not only the lack of educated youths, but also the emergence of an unexpected event. The honeymoon period between Bai Ming and Wallace suddenly ended. The Security Bureau sent news that a war seemed inevitable. The reason turned out to be that Biyao, who was in charge of the security of the trade, blackmailed Walla merchants. The close relationship between the two sides suddenly became like fire and water. Chapter 624. Biyao was Bai Ming's Marquis Wu Qingho and also the nephew of General Heng. Naturally, his uncle Heng would take responsibility for the trouble he caused. No one knew how it ended up in such a situation where the two sides were about to go to war. Once Bai Ming was about to go to war with Walla, Yang Chendong had to pay attention to it. He had too many concerns there. He had decided to take a look at the grassland in the north after dealing with the matters in the south. There was a vast land with many strong horses. He wanted to organize an army of cavalry, just like Genghis Khan, to sweep across the Eurasian continent and conquer the world. Before that, the matter of the Golden Bien dynasty must be solved. However, to Yang Chendong's surprise, he did not intend to swallow the other party, but the other party did not intend to negotiate either. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He would just bombard them with artillery fire. This was also a unique way of pressuring them. Yang Chendong ordered, and the 100mm mortar was put to use again. Shells were fired at Suwon City on the opposite side. With each shell falling, countless buildings were destroyed, and countless soldiers and civilians were killed. This was not the first time that the artillery was fired at the city. The powerful destructive power had caused the people in the city to begin a mass migration. After all, no one knew whether the next shell would fall on their heads. Especially Yang Chendong's order was the kind of random bombardment without a set target. Even General De N in the city did not know where the next shell would fall. This made him tremble in fear every day, and he did not feel safe at all even if he changed places to sleep every day. All he could do was to keep urging people to return to the country and ask His Majesty to agree to the peace talks. After all, this feeling of living in the shadow of death every day was not good. Golden Bien City, where the capital of the Golden Bien dynasty was located. The top officials of the dynasty had been discussing how to deal with the aggressive mercenaries for a few days, but there was still no consensus. The ministers were divided into two factions. One faction was in favor of war, while the other was in favor of war. Overall, the pro-war faction still had a certain advantage. They had already received news that both Siam and Awad had sent troops to Laos. Once they received good news, the mercenaries would definitely retreat. At that time, it would be time for the pro-war faction to strike and reclaim their lost territory. When King Boromir saw this, he did not respond to the mercenaries' attempt to negotiate. He wanted to be the first king to defeat the mercenaries. However, he was destined to be disappointed. Both the Siamese and Ava armies had retreated. It was only because of the lack of transportation that the news did not reach his ears. The residence of the right Prime Minister of Golden Rim City was located in a very prosperous area of the city. Two 2-meter-high stone lions stood in front of the gate day and night, showing the noble status of the owner of the house. In fact, in the Golden Bien dynasty, the right Prime Minister Dun did have a lot of power, second only to the king. He was on par with the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei. Perhaps to deal with the rumors of discord between the two, or perhaps because King Palomo did not wish to see his subjects too united and thus threaten his own position, the two ministers had been arguing over various issues all this while. Sometimes, the left minister would win, and sometimes, the right minister would win. This time, facing the issue of whether to fight or to negotiate with the mercenaries, the two prime ministers had different opinions. The left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei was in favor of war, while the right Prime Minister Dun was in favor of peace. Under the leadership of the two of them, the court officials were naturally divided into two factions and followed their lead. Because the king had certain expectations for Siam and Ava, the current situation was that the left Prime Minister had a slight advantage, while the right Prime Minister was slightly passive. Today, after the court, the right Prime Minister Dun returned to his residence with an unhappy face. He went straight to the backyard. As if it had become a habit, Yunk liked to go to the backyard of some important ministers. It seemed to be safer there. This time, he was staying in the backyard of the right Prime Minister's residence. Duen arrived with a displeased expression. When he saw Skylark's seat resting on a recliner with his eyes closed, he couldn't help but complain even before he walked over. Sir Yun, I can really sleep. Don't you know that we're about to send troops to Suwon City? Send troops? Yunk, who was lying on the recliner, slowly opened his eyes. Yes, the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei is leading more and more officials to suggest sending troops. I can't stop it. I think you should leave Golden Bien City quickly. Du Che seemed to like to see Yunk's surprised look. From the moment this person appeared until now, he had been acting as if nothing had happened, which made him feel very displeased. No matter what, he was still the right minister of the country, with a high position and power. Yet, just because he had accepted 200,000 taels of silver from the other party, he had not only detained the other party at home, but he was also running around in the imperial court for the other party. Now that the situation was becoming more and more unfavorable, he had already decided to stop. As for the 200,000 taels of silver he received before, he had spent a lot of effort on this trip. Didn't he need to be compensated? Oh. Yunk blinked his eyes, then leaned his head back and began to rest again. Dun, who had turned his head and said this, was still waiting to see Yunk's panicked look. The other party might even beg him. If he was happy, it would not be a problem to accept some money from the other party to ensure his safety. If he was unhappy, then he would just wave his hand and drive him away. What a joke! Do you really think that mercenaries are the best in the world? Why don't you look at the situation outside? The mercenaries have become an existence that everyone wants to beat up. He turned his head to the side and waited for a few breaths of time, but there was no movement at all. Out of curiosity, he turned around to take a look and saw Yun Kei lying down with a satisfied and comfortable look on his face. He immediately became angry. Mr. Yun, didn't you hear what I said just now? I'll tell you. Without waiting for him to explain the seriousness of the matter, a piece of white paper with words written on it appeared in front of him. The other end of the paper was gently held by Yunk. What? What is this? His face was filled with doubt. Could this be the banknote that the other party gave him to save his life? But it didn't seem like it. With curiosity in his heart, Dun still reached out to take it. He wanted to see what the other party was up to. If he still dared to play tricks with him, then he would definitely let the other party know that he, the Horse Lord, also had 3 eyes. He took the paper and found that it was indeed not a banknote. There were only a few lines of words written on it. Out of instinct, he looked at the words one by one. Along with it, his originally condescending and arrogant expression also changed. After reading it for the first time, his arrogant expression had already disappeared. After reading it for the second time, cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. After reading it for the third time, the way he looked at Yunk had completely changed. Previously, it was a condescending look, but now, it was filled with great shock and even a hint of flattery. Mr. Yunk, where did this come from? Are you joking? Slowly opening his eyes, Skylark chuckled. Joking? Do you think I would joke about this with the right Prime Minister? Let me tell you, this is the battle report I just received. It's 100% accurate. How about it? You should know what will happen next, right? At this time, Yunk was very certain and was full of confidence. People said that a weak country had no diplomacy. And diplomacy could be divided into several types. For example, their infiltration work was also a diplomatic method. Yunk was very capable, but first, he still needed a platform. A platform that could give him a chance to perform. The mercenaries were getting stronger step by step, and winning every battle was a platform for him to perform. It was with this guarantee that he could carry out his work like a fish in water. He could use all his methods and perform wonderful infiltration battles. This time, the mercenaries did not let him down. When everyone thought that they would suffer heavy losses and even lose their status, who would have thought that under the command and planning of the 6th young master, the scales of victory would lean towards him again? Yunk was still lying there, and he didn't even have the intention to get up. But now, Dun didn't mean to blame him, or he couldn't care less about it. He was standing there and constantly wiping his cold sweat, thinking about the situation that the Gilded Dynasty would face next. What was written on the paper was the situation at the front line. It was sent to Skylark by wireless telegram. It clearly recorded the defeat of the Siamese army and the failure of the Awa army. They had no choice but to retreat. What was written on it was what the Gilded Dynasty relied on before. If what was written on it was true, then the Gilded Dynasty would have no reinforcements, and the whole country would be in danger. As the right Prime Minister of a country, Dun naturally knew what this meant. In the worst-case scenario, the mercenaries would be like beasts coming out of the mountains. They could open their bloody mouths and bite the Gilded Dynasty at will. If they wanted to, it was not impossible for them to bite the Gilded Dynasty to death. Thinking of such a result, and thinking that His Majesty wanted to continue to send more troops to Suwing City, wasn't that tantamount to angering the mercenaries? At that time, there would be no need for peace talks. They would just fight until one side was crippled. But no matter how he looked at it, it seemed that only the Gilded Dynasty would be crippled. Dun's face changed again and again. At this moment, his mind was spinning rapidly. He slowly came up with an idea. That was to take the initiative to ask for peace before the other side sent out troops. A slap would never hit a smiling face. As long as their posture was humble, it was still possible to negotiate successfully. After all, the army of the Golden Bien dynasty had not been completely damaged. They still had the power to fight back. Once the other 2 allies saw that they were resisting desperately, they might send troops for the second time. Chapter 625. The opportunity was right in front of him. Dun, who had made up his mind, no longer had that mocking expression on his face. Instead, he put on a flattering smile and took half a step forward. Sir Yun, can you open your eyes and tell this Prime Minister what the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has in mind? After all, we are now neighboring countries. It's better not to hurt our relationship. Dun took the initiative to lower his head. Yunk was not surprised by this. If there were still people who wanted to start a war with the mercenaries after receiving this information, they would either have already given up on life and death, or they would have other ideas. He could not help but sigh in his heart. The sixth young master also sent a telegram, saying that they could agree to the peace talks, but they had to try their best to obtain benefits. This time, Yang Qindong did not act like he did with the Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms. He did not send troops to destroy the kingdoms. In the end, it was not that he had become merciful, or that his ambition had been satisfied. On the contrary, everything was done for the sake of the overall situation. Without enough resources and manpower, even if they sent troops to destroy the Phnom Penh dynasty, they would only be picking up a mess. Not to mention, if they really fought, the price they would have to pay would be too high. No one could guarantee that Siam and Ava would not send reinforcements again. The mercenaries did not want to face such a situation before they were fully prepared. With the idea of mutual destruction, no one knew what kind of power these two kingdoms would erupt in the face of a life and death crisis. Once their armies really entered the Vietnamese and Laos provinces, the losses would be immeasurable. Without sufficient preparation, Yang Qindong did not want to face this situation. Because of this, Yang still had a lot of work to do. Otherwise, he would have already laid his cards on the table with Duane. It was either death or surrender, and he would have just made a decision. After sighing in his heart, Skylark finally stood up from the reclining chair and stood in front of Duane. "Right, Prime Minister, this time it was you who provoked the mercenaries first, and then we sent out our troops. Even if we were to send out our troops, we would inform you beforehand that you would have to give us a definite answer after the emissary returned to Wanxiang City. And it's precisely because of your arrogance and rudeness that we're meeting on the battlefield, isn't it?" "Yes, yes." Du Si lowered her head like a child who had done something wrong and nodded repeatedly. Some people said that this time, it was the mercenaries who started the war without declaring war, but that was not the case. Everything was just as Yang had said. The emissary from Laos had given them a chance, but no one had taken it seriously at that time. That was why Shangding City was suddenly breached and Zhujing City's 100,000 soldiers were defeated. "Alright, since Right Chief Minister has already admitted that it was your fault this time, then whether my mercenary army will fight or shake hands with you will depend on your performance and what you are willing to pay. In short, this time, don't take my words seriously. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy medicine for regret anywhere. Alright, I'll wait for you here. You can also go and verify the authenticity of the information. In fact, there's no need to verify it. Your scouts should be able to send the news back in 2 days. But if you haven't made a decision by then, my mercenary army will take the initiative to make the decision for you." "No, no." Duan kept shaking his head. Previously, because he had placed his hopes on the allies of the two countries, he wanted to send troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries. Since he knew that his allies had been defeated or had retreated, it was very clear what to do. Duan's attitude was arrogant and even a little arrogant. But when he left, he bowed with every step, like a child seeking advice from a teacher. He was extremely respectful. After finally leaving the backyard, Duan's expression returned to its serious state. "Men, prepare a sedan. I want to enter the palace to see His Majesty." It was not that Duan didn't doubt the authenticity of the information provided by Yunk. But Yunk had already made it clear that he would not wander around and would wait here, and the news would be confirmed in 2 days. Did this person eat a bear's heart and leopard's guts to joke about such a matter? If everything was true, then it was necessary for him to report the situation to the king. It was better to be prepared than to not know anything at all. In the king's palace, Duan stood in the side hall. Opposite him sat King Boromir. Boromir was a little fat, and he was wearing a golden royal robe. He narrowed his eyes. "Right, Prime Minister, I have thought about it. The left Prime Minister's words are not unreasonable. Since Siam and Ava have already sent news, they will definitely send troops. As allies, we should also send more troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries." Boromir was very clear about the reason why Duan wanted to see him. In the morning, the two prime ministers had been arguing in the court. In the end, Duan's faction became weaker, and even he, the king, leaned towards Dingdingwei's opinion and continued to send reinforcements. Boromir did not understand why Duan wanted to see him. Could it be that he wanted to continue persuading him? Your Majesty, this is the information I received. Please take a look. Duan did not explain anything. He only presented the information he received from Yunk. He believed that once the king saw this, his attitude would change drastically. You just received this information? Boromir looked at Duan with a puzzled gaze. The right prime minister did not have the authority to gather information, so where did he get this information from? Puzzled, Boromir took the paper with the words written on it from the eunuch beside him. After looking at it casually, his eyes widened and his body began to tremble. In the end, even his hands that were holding the paper were trembling. Right Prime Minister, where did you get this information? Why didn't I know about it? Boromir suddenly raised his head and looked at Duan with a terrifying gaze. Your Majesty, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos. I only saw it when I returned to my residence. Duan naturally would not reveal that Yunk was in his residence. Who knew if the king would accuse him of colluding with the enemy in a fit of anger? Besides, he was counting on his relationship with Yunk to gain more benefits in the future. He had to hide this person well. A merchant from Laos? Boromir was not very satisfied with this answer. He wanted to ask why such a merchant did not look for him or any other officials, but the right prime minister. But before Boromir could ask, Duan took the initiative to explain, Your Majesty, my butler said that the Laos merchant will come looking for me again. But in my opinion, this is not important. What is important is whether the information is true or not. If it is, what should we do next? Right, according to the right prime minister, is this news true? Boromir seemed to have woken up the person in his dream. Boromir's voice carried a hint of urgency as he asked. In fact, it did not matter how the information came about. The most important thing was whether it was true or not. If it's true, it's a big mistake to send troops to the front. What's wrong? The other two allies have retreated. Do you want to fight head-on with the mercenaries with the Golden Border Dynasty's powerful army? This. In my opinion, regardless of whether it is true or not, there is no smoke without fire. We have to prepare for a backup plan. Duan raised his head. He wanted to say that since he was the one who sent the information, of course, he would believe it to be true. But he would not say that. He wanted the king to figure it out himself. At the same time, he wanted to use this as an excuse to trick some people, so he could not be too sure. Yes, it is necessary to prepare for a backup plan. Boromir kept nodding, but soon he shook his head. But we have to be careful. Someone might be deliberately spreading false information to mislead us. So, summon the left prime minister to the palace for a meeting. In the end, Boromir did not make a decision. He wanted to summon the others to listen to their opinions. When he heard that the king wanted to summon the left prime minister, Duan's eyes flashed with excitement. He knew the king too well. The king liked to listen to everyone's opinions, as if that was the best way to make the right choice. But he had forgotten that the truth was often in the hands of only a few people. The king summoned the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei, in his official robe, appeared in the side hall. Ding Ding Wei was tall and slender. He looked to be in his 50s. His eyes were not big, but they were very spirited and gave people a feeling of wisdom. Your subject greets your majesty. When he entered the side hall, Ding Ding Wei bowed to the king according to the rules. Left Prime Minister, please rise. Come, bring this over. When Ding Ding Wei entered the hall, Boromir's expression had already returned to normal. He looked calm and relaxed. Obviously, he wanted to see the debate between the two prime ministers before making a decision. With the demeanor of a prime minister, Ding Ding Wei unhurriedly took the paper that the eunuch presented to him. First, he gave it a cursory glance. His eyes immediately widened. Then, he carefully read it twice. After that, he did not immediately speak. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. King Boromir was not in a hurry. He seemed to be used to the left prime minister's way of doing things. He sat there calmly and did not say anything. On the other side, Duan was also not in a hurry. This was a trap to begin with. He had even thought about what choice Ding Dingwei would make. He was just waiting for him to jump in. After about 5 or 6 breaths, Ding Dingwei finally opened his eyes. He cupped his fists and said to Boromir, "Your Majesty, may I know where this information came from?" Chapter 626. For the left prime minister to say this, it was clear that he did not believe that this was news from the army. He knew very well that regarding the movements of the other 2 countries, it would take at least the day after tomorrow for definite news to arrive. Now that it had arrived, it could only mean that this news did not come from official channels. The left prime minister is indeed amazing. This news didn't come from the military. It was sent by the right prime minister. Boromir seemed to be very satisfied with the left prime minister's performance and didn't forget to praise him. The right prime minister sent it? Ding Dingwei laughed. Originally, he was suspicious of this news because they were enemies with the mercenaries. Of course, he had done his research on the strength of the mercenaries. In his opinion, although the mercenaries were powerful, their weakness was also very obvious. They were too few in number. They might be able to deal with any one country, but if it was 1 against 3, they wouldn't be able to do it. But now, the news said that the armies of Siam and Ava had sent out their troops and were defeated. It seemed too unreal. This was already suspicious. Now that he knew that the news came from the right prime minister, Ding Dingwei instinctively thought that it was fake news. As for why this news came, it was very simple. It was because Dun wanted to prevent him from sending reinforcements to the front line. Because the 2 of them had different political views, once the reinforcements were sent, it meant that the other side had lost the battle. Oh. Why is the left prime minister laughing? No one knew what Boromir was thinking when he said this. But from his words, it was clear that he was a person who wasn't afraid of things getting out of hand. "Your Majesty, please forgive me for being rude. Now, I would like to ask the right prime minister a few questions. Is that all right?" Ding Dingwei still smiled and asked Boromir for permission. "I believe the right prime minister won't mind, right?" Boromir nodded with a smile. This was equivalent to agreeing on behalf of Dun. "Of course." The confident Dun nodded reservedly. Then, he looked at Ding Dingwei and said, "If the left prime minister has any questions, feel free to ask. I will answer truthfully." At this moment, Dun's expression was very calm. There was even a hint of confidence on his face. When Ding Dingwei saw all of this, for some reason, his heart couldn't help but tremble. As an old rival, he knew all too well what kind of person Duan was. For the sake of fighting for power and profit, they would do anything. Such people were often willing to turn black into white. They could be said to have mastered the art of thick black. Because of this person had done too many things that made people feel guilty. It was difficult to describe him as confident. But now, he was actually so calm. Could it be that the information was true? As soon as this idea flashed through his mind, it was quickly rejected by Ding Dingwei himself. If it was true, His Majesty would not have summoned him. Since His Majesty had called him here, it could only mean one thing. Even His Majesty was skeptical about this information. Once he and His Majesty both approved of this information, the matter of sending more troops to the front lines would be delayed indefinitely. This meant that the other party had won this battle, which also meant that the other party was stronger than him. When he thought of this, Ding Dingwei threw the suspicion that had just arisen to the back of his mind. "Right Prime Minister, may I ask where did you get this information?" "To be honest, left Prime Minister, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos." Duan, who was already prepared, replied calmly. "Laos merchant? I wonder if right Prime Minister has seen him with your own eyes?" When he heard that the source of the information was so childish, Ding Dingwei was even more certain of his guess. This must be a smokescreen thrown out by Duan in order to win the battle of whether or not to send troops. Since he knew what was going on, he definitely couldn't let the other party succeed. No. Duan answered very straightforwardly. But he didn't forget to add, although I haven't seen him, I still believe this information. So according to my opinion, whether or not to send troops to Suwon City needs to be carefully considered. Ha 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 ha. This answer finally made Ding Dingwei unable to hold back his laughter. If it wasn't for the following explanation, perhaps he wouldn't be so certain. But since he took the initiative to mention the issue of sending troops, it was tantamount to revealing 300 taels of silver here. After being the left prime minister for so many years, Ding Dingwei believed that his ability to observe people's expressions had reached a very high level. Duan's words were tantamount to confirming his previous guess. Since he had already made his decision, Ding Dingwei didn't look at Duan anymore. Instead, he turned to Boromov and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, in my opinion, this information can't be trusted. It's completely groundless. So I ask your Majesty to make a decision and allow us to send reinforcements to Suwon City. When the time is right, we will go all out to counterattack and recover the lost land. This will raise the prestige of our country, as well as the prestige of our king. Ding Dingwei finally made his move. Duan, who had been waiting impatiently, also turned to Boromov and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, I believe this information is true. It's the same as my previous guess. So I'm sure your Majesty will be cautious in sending troops. I can even guarantee with my official position that if this information isn't true, I'm willing to resign in 2 days and retire to my hometown. At this moment, Boromov and Ding Dingwei were shocked by Duan's words. This was a scene that they hadn't expected at all. Originally, after hearing Ding Dingwei's words, Boromov could basically confirm that this was a fake information that Duan had deliberately created to delay the sending of reinforcements. He was still a little angry about this. He could allow the two prime ministers to fight each other, but the prerequisite was that they couldn't disrupt the development of the country. Otherwise, he wouldn't hesitate to chop off their heads. But suddenly, Duan was so confident that he would use his authority as a stake. At this moment, Boromov hesitated. Boromov wasn't the only one who thought so. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei was also caught off guard by Duan's move. What's going on? It's just a plan to delay the arrival of reinforcements. Why did he make such a huge bet? Why did the right Prime Minister dare to make such a huge bet? What did he rely on? Ding Dingwei looked at Dun seriously, but he couldn't see anything from Dun's face. Especially at this moment, Dun intentionally closed his eyes. This made Ding Dingwei feel that he didn't know where to start and analyze. The side hall fell silent. Both the king and the left prime minister were shocked by Duan's bold words. They couldn't help but wonder if they were wrong. Duan opened his eyes and said, if this information is true, not only should we stop sending reinforcements, but we should also find a way to negotiate with the mercenaries. The sooner we negotiate, the more sincere we will be and the less we will have to pay. On the other hand, when the situation is settled, we will have to pay several times the price if we want to negotiate with them. Duan's words couldn't be more apt to describe him now. Duan's words were completely for the sake of the Golden Border dynasty and had nothing to do with any power struggle. King Boromir was indeed frightened by Duan's boldness. He couldn't help but hesitate. But before he could say anything, left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei also opened his mouth and said in the same shocking tone, I think this news is fake. Although the mercenaries are powerful, their military strength is limited. It is impossible for them to stop the armies of Siam and Ava at the same time. This is the right time to send reinforcements. I am also willing to guarantee that if I am wrong, I will retire and return to my hometown. Well, Tintinwei had also put in a lot of effort. His words were so certain that Boromir was in a dilemma. Normally, such a thing wouldn't happen. The word official was always there. Real officials, especially important ministers, spoke with a sense of propriety. Even if they were more than 90% sure, they wouldn't be so certain. They would always leave a way out for themselves, right? But today, the two prime ministers had put their official positions on the line and their opinions were so different. This was so abnormal that it made Boromir even more hesitant. On the other hand, Duan was first surprised, then he was overjoyed. Someone had finally jumped into the pit. It was his old rival. He really wanted to shout out loud to vent his excitement. He was so excited in his heart, but on the surface, Duan still suppressed his excitement, cupped his fists and said to Ding Ding Wei, "Good, Lord Left Prime Minister, if that's the case, we might as well make a bet. We will see the result in 2 days. But I still have one thing to say. If we want to negotiate with the mercenaries then, we will have to pay a higher price. Let's make a bet. But I still support sending reinforcements. If we send reinforcements too late, we can't afford to suffer any losses at the front line," Ding Ding Wei said firmly. Then, he stopped looking at Duan and focused all his attention on King Boromir. Obviously, he was listening to the king's orders. The two prime ministers had put their official positions on the line and spoke with great confidence. This way, Boromir was the one who had a headache. This was different from what he had expected. He wanted to see which side was right and support. But now that both sides were so strong, how could he make a decision? Boromir wanted to put his hands into his hair to calm down, but he knew that if he did so, it would be very unbecoming of him as a king. But in front of the two prime ministers, he had to give an explanation. After thinking about it, he decided to continue mediating. If he couldn't make the decision, then he would let the facts make the decision. All right, since the two prime ministers are so confident in their negotiations, why don't we all calm down and wait for a while? There should be news in 2 days. At that time, this king will know how to make a decision. Chapter 627. The king actually chose to wait, causing Ding Ding Wei's expression to change. "Your Majesty, you can't do that. This is exactly what some people are trying to do. If there are no reinforcements coming from the front, it will be a big problem. Your Majesty, what we should do now isn't to send reinforcements. Instead, we should immediately send a peace envoy to contact the mercenaries. This is the only way to resolve this matter with the smallest price. A long delay may lead to trouble." Duan also called out. He looked very anxious, but only he knew how happy he was. He had already dug a hole for Ding Ding Wei, now he just had to wait 2 days to see the results. As for whether the king would agree to the peace talks now, he wasn't the one who would suffer a loss. Since the king wasn't anxious, why should he be anxious? The two prime ministers seemed to have the intention to quarrel again. Boromir immediately felt a headache coming on. He couldn't help but say in a slightly angry tone, all right. It's just 2 days later. Nothing major will happen. This matter is settled. Don't say anything else." The king was angry. Whether it was Ding Ding Wei or Dun, they knew when to stop. They just glared at each other and left the palace after saluting. Not long after the two of them left, the whole story began to spread. First, some of the important ministers knew about this matter. Soon, the commoners on the streets were also very clear about it. King Boromir didn't say anything about it. He even knew that the two prime ministers must have deliberately spread the news in order to undermine each other. It was better for him to remain uninvolved in this matter. This way, he would be able to seize the initiative. Even the king was prepared to watch the show, and so were the officials and commoners. Soon, they formed 2 factions and began to have an intense discussion about who would win. The combat strength of the mercenaries naturally became the main topic of discussion. Those who supported Duan would naturally say that the mercenaries were powerful, and that they were omnipotent. Those who supported Ding Ding Wei would naturally say that no matter how powerful the mercenaries were, they were too few in number. It was absolutely impossible for them to win a war against the 3 countries. Duan's words were just to delay the reinforcements to support the front line. It was just to tear down the left prime minister's platform. This kind of action that sacrificed the interests of the country for one's own personal reputation was really too despicable. If it could be proven that Duan was lying 2 days later, then he should be charged with the crime of harming the country. The people who supported both sides were still having an intense debate. There was no victory or defeat, but the mercenaries' reputation had already penetrated deep into the hearts of the commoners. This was especially true for the people who had escaped from Shangding City. Some of them had come to the capital, and through their mouths, they had described the mercenaries as incomparably terrifying. In the end, the mercenaries' reputation had been greatly increased. This was something that even Yunk had not expected. However, this was good news after all. Yunk quickly ordered his subordinates to spread all kinds of news about the mercenaries. For example, the commoners in Vietnam and Laos were living very well. With Yang Bao, once they obtained citizenship, they wouldn't be bullied anymore. If this news was spread during normal times, not only would it not be accepted, but it would also be criticized as a misconception. However, at this time, when the news was spread, not only did it attract a lot of attention, but it also attracted a lot of attention. The two sides were fighting, and for a while, there was no clear winner. Everyone was watching the show, but there were also people who were very depressed. For example, General Hun Senator Hun Sen was still very strong. After losing Jujing City and becoming the general of the defeated army, he was escorted back to Golden Rim City. It was said that he was going to be punished. At this moment, his greedy behavior saved him. Because he was greedy for money, he became the child of wealth. As long as he had some influence in the imperial court and could speak, he would send people to give generous gifts to the officials. As a result, there were many people who spoke up for him. In the end, the left and right prime ministers spoke up together. The left prime minister Ding Ding Wei thought that at this time, although Hun Sen had some small problems, he could still fight. Moreover, killing a general before the war was not good for the morale of the army, so he spoke up for him. The right prime minister Duan was much simpler. He had received enough money, so he naturally stood up and said a few good words. The two prime ministers had the same opinion, which was a very rare thing. In the end, King Boromir decided to give Hun Sen a chance to perform meritorious deeds. He even gave him military power and told him to be prepared to support Su Wing City at any time. But now, the two prime ministers had different opinions and couldn't decide who was better. Instead, Hun Sen stopped supporting Su Wing City. He had no choice but to wait at home. But in his heart, he was cursing Duan. If it wasn't for the right prime minister, he would have been at the front line by now and could even turn the situation around to prove his ability. No matter how the atmosphere in the king's city changed, time didn't stop flowing because of this. It was still moving forward on schedule. After tonight, it would be 2 days tomorrow. It was time for the Golden Rim Dynasty's fast horse scouts to return. The results would be revealed tomorrow. Dwayne became a little nervous. After all, he didn't get the news through his own channels, so after thinking about it, he went to the backyard to look for Skylark because he couldn't sleep. At this time, Yin Kei was not asleep. He seemed to have known that Duan would come. He set up a simple tea shed in the small courtyard and specially prepared an extra chair. Mr. Yin knew that I would come. As soon as Duan appeared here and saw the furnishings, he was shocked. Hee, we will see the results tomorrow. Right, Prime Minister, it is inevitable that you will be impatient. Come over and have a cup of tea to calm your mind. Yunk had a smile on his face as he casually pointed to the chair opposite him. Duan also wanted to hear Yunkei say that there was no problem with the information, so he simply sat down. But just as he sat down, after hearing Yunkei's next sentence, he suddenly jumped up. Yunk chuckled and said, actually, the previous news was just to tease Right Prime Minister. The mercenaries at the front line need time to take down Suwon City. They were afraid that you would send reinforcements and disrupt the plans of the Duke of Loyalty, so they made this plan. After hearing these words, Duan was frightened. He couldn't help but jump up. Then he angrily stared at Yun Kei, who was still sitting there and fiddling with the tea, and said, "Mr. Yun, don't make jokes at this time. Otherwise, people will die." This so-called death naturally meant that he would call the guards and servants of the mansion to kill Yun Kei in a fit of anger. Because if all of this was true, he would become a tool in the hands of others. He would lose face and delay the important matters of the country. If that was really the case, he would become a sinner of the Golden Border dynasty. Duan was really angry. He even had an impulse to kill someone. Yun Kei acted as if he didn't hear anything. After finishing the last procedure of making tea, he raised his head and looked at the angry Duan and said, "Right, Prime Minister, of course I was joking." Huh? Duan's expression changed when he heard this. He didn't even know which sentence was true and which was false. "Ha ha ha, right, Prime Minister, isn't what I said just now what you suspected in your heart?" Yun Kei once again pointed to the chair opposite him, indicating that he could sit down. Then he casually said, "I just said what right Prime Minister was thinking. But this only represents what you think, not what I think. I still have the same words, the news is incomparably accurate. Otherwise, I wouldn't stay here and wait for the confrontation, right?" Yun Kei dared to stay in the mansion, which was already a clear proof. Unless he was playing a death game, otherwise, he wouldn't take such a risk. This sentence finally made Duan calm down a little. He sat down again. "Mr. Yun, is the news really true? You also know that the outside world is in chaos. If the news is not true, then this Prime Minister is really dead." "Of course it is true. I have already said this. Right, Prime Minister, have you thought about it? Once the news comes tomorrow that proves you are right, what should we do next?" Yun Kei was waiting for Duan's arrival, not to dispel the other party's worries, but to prepare for the next layout. Duan didn't know this. He was now thinking about the problem raised by Yun Quebec. He really didn't think about it. First, it was because he couldn't confirm the accuracy of the news. Second, he wanted to see left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei make a fool of himself. As for other things, he didn't have time to think about it. But since Yun Kei asked this question, he must have thought about it. This time, Duan asked with an attitude of asking for advice. "May I ask Mr. Yun, what should this Prime Minister do next?" "You don't have to do anything. Just say that you are sick because you were suspected this time and go back to the mansion to stay. Let the left Prime Minister and the others mess around outside. The higher they jump, the harder they will fall in the future. When the time is right, right Prime Minister will stand up and shout. That will be the best time to prove your ability." The smile on Yun Kei's face disappeared, replaced by a face of determination and decisiveness. Huh. Duan was also a very smart person. He immediately thought of something and said, "Mr. Yun means to first give up the right to negotiate, and when those people can't reach an agreement, this Prime Minister will help to decide the overall situation?" "Yes." Yun Kei nodded with satisfaction. He praised the other party for being a smart person. Duane chuckled after hearing Skylark's praise. But then he frowned and said, "But if someone else completes the negotiation with the mercenaries, then wouldn't this Prime Minister have nothing to do with it?" You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.